morning. Oh, wakey, wakey. Eggs and bacon. We're going to talk about some presidential issues. There is some application to the Pina Colada song. Politicians all talk like they don't like certain things. They hate pork barreling. They're not into causing taxpayer pain. But in all reality, I am not being a fence rider, but in truth, many of the hardest on both sides of the aisle would end up pairing together, answering an anonymous ad, because they all like the same thing. It's just who's doing it. That's the truth of it. We're going to talk about this. I, for one, feel that the best plan in this particular case was the one that Republicans and the president were pushing forward. But there's always a give and take. Nothing's 100%. Because you still have to get the votes of the opposition party. Rarely, if ever, in my lifetime can I recall a case in which there were so many votes going one way or the other that you did not need any support from the opposition party to get a budget passed, or in this case, to stop a furlough and a government shutdown, which would have made... I don't think in most cases we've seen an enormous amount of loss on the part of the federal workers, but it is a delay, and in the meantime, they can't pay bills, they're in a very hard spot, and in order to make that back up, they've got to do overtime. And I don't know if anybody's ever worked overtime before. It's been a while since I actually clocked it, although I guess I work overtime all the time. I've never worked so much and enjoyed it as much as I do when you're working for yourself. But that said, most people, it's exhausting, especially if you're doing a physical type job in which you got to put out effort, physical effort, emotional, intellectual effort, and getting caught up. It's no small thing. The hope that both parties have, though, it's the same strategy. It doesn't matter who's responsible for the government shutdown, or really, we are responsible for any government shutdown. Nobody wants to hear that. That's one big point I'm going to make today. As we try to point the finger of blame at Democrats or Republicans and say, it's their fault, and this is why I didn't get paid, or this is why I had to go home without going to work today. In the end, it is the people of America, it is our fault. Because if we made our intentions quite clear, if we put the blind political following aside just because whoever it is that represents our party said this, got a little education on our own, it would not be so taxing. What they do in Washington, D.C. is not rocket science. There's a preponderance of Americans who don't read the news part of the newspaper online, because nobody reads the newspaper per se anymore. They don't get objective news. They go where they get the political polarization that suits their fancy, if they're interested in it. And then there's the most of everyone else, and they don't go involved, they don't watch politics at all. The reason being, they feel intimidated. They feel like it's beyond them. They don't know anything about politics. That's the biggest mistake I can ever hear anybody say, is that you know tons about politics if you have any kind of information, first-hand experience, education, common sense, any of those things. That helps you dramatically in having any kind of political opinion. Do you really think that every politician we've had has been above average intelligence? And I'm not putting them down. They don't have to be in order to have the wisdom to make good decisions. Intelligence, in my opinion, is not about having all the right answers, but it's about knowing where to go and get them, or how to make the right choice when you're presented with options. Donald Trump stood a firm line that was the strongest line, and that's why Democrats acquiesced to his proposal, which is going to keep the government running for a few more weeks until a bigger budget has worked out. And I can promise you the Democrats, after Donald Trump was president, stood and said in a tweet that Democrats caved. Well, now they're not going to want to cave the next time, because you did a little celebration dance in their end zone. You can get by with a bit more in these circumstances as a president dealing with seasoned veteran politicians in senior positions because they're used to it. But lesson to be learned for everyone else. Don't think that when you defeat somebody's argument or you get your way at work, that is not the time to do a celebration dance. the end zone dance you can do by yourself, alone, at home, in the broom closet, wherever else. Sometimes, somebody needed to get a little reality check and not get their way. I get that. There's a lot of people like that. A lot of people who just abuse their position of privilege until all of a sudden somebody sees above them a superior that they're throwing their weight around for ego more than what's right. And a good boss would probably put them in check but not make a big deal out of it. It'll have all the needed effect that you would like just seeing that happen. So if you're just now tuning in, we're going to talk about Trump and his victory in getting his initiatives to keep the government funded and going on. We'll get what your thoughts may be on that. Who do you blame for getting to this point to begin with? And is it just me, or does it seem like the media continues to come up with all sorts of reasons as to why Donald Trump is not gonna pan out, not gonna work, he's not gonna get his way, whatever he's doing is gonna fail, it's gonna be bad, it's gonna be horrible, and then he ends up surprising everybody, much like the election itself. The guy, no doubt about it, speaks out of turn on issues without thoroughly thinking in some instances. In other instances, I believe it's an intentional effort to put his opponents off balance by causing them such great anger or a distraction. So I guess there could be three things, because I've clearly seen that, and I may have not noticed that in enough instances along the way in other areas, because I really do believe it is intentional a lot of times to create a distraction, and it works to his benefit. Where do you see the sunrise today, folks? As we are going here, look at the colors now. We had a cold front come through. By the way, weather in South Texas, it's changing. You hate the heat? Not a problem. Wait about 12 hours, we'll have something else, maybe a little less. You don't like the cold, don't worry, it'll get hot again. But this should be a beautiful sunrise. I was going to take us around somewhere else, but I may have to go down to our gorgeous bayfront. And I know there's a number of you that watch from other places. Maybe you visited Corpus Christi, Texas, or South Texas, the Gulf Coast, or you used to live in this area, but now you don't. And so you miss it. I understand. I mean, the gorgeous, I'm going to clear this up for us just so you get the best clear view you possibly can. Bear with me. I don't know what this truck is doing up ahead of us, but anytime you see flashing lights, I guess be careful. I will tell you this, I had pulled over to the side of the road one time driving back from Killeen, Texas to Corpus Christi, and was checking a map, looking at some other stuff, and here comes some lights that look more like law enforcement than this. The yellow and blue typically is road crew or something along those lines, not law enforcement. But I saw some stuff that looked like, law enforcement lights, and I'm like, oh great, now what? I have a tail light that's out. Somebody's going to give me a ticket because it was that long stretch of road where there was nobody else out there and it was kind of foggy. And here comes this guy. I'm trying to think of the movie he reminded me of. It was a John Cusack movie. I think it was a remake where you got all these different characters and he's recanting the story. And in the end, you see that they're all characters inside this guy's mind. John Cusack was just a character in it, I think, but in the retelling of the story, he was like the main character. In reality, he was a bald, heavy-set man whose neck and head were the exact same width. Remember that? He was like a lunatic serial killer, and this is what he thought was going on all the time, imagining stuff in his head. That's what this guy looked like when he got out of the vehicle. And then I realized that he wasn't law enforcement, and maybe there's some legal right that these individuals have. I don't know what I'm still curious as to what he might be, because again, it was some stretch between Killeen and Corpus Christi, Texas, and it seemed it was a back road. It was foggy, and I was tired, and I wasn't sure if we were going the right way. So I'm looking at a map, and this guy comes out, and I tell him not to approach the vehicle any closer. He's not showing me a badge. He's not telling me he's law enforcement, and he's not. Apparently, if you're broke down on the side of the road or you have some sort of problem, these guys are tow truck operators that are contracted with the state of Texas, and so I guess they can tow you, but that knucklehead, not listening to me, and I'm not sure who he is, came real close to ending his existence. And for what? Because you can't stop a few feet before the door? I thought, well, I'll wait till he gets to the point where there's no No mistaking it. He looked creepy, looks like a serial killer, but instead he was just a tow truck driver. I mean, I'm not saying that they always look alike, but it's a rough business being a tow truck driver. So, they may attract a rougher kind of an individual in order to do that, only because, nobody likes to have their vehicle towed, even when it's their fault. Especially if you're going to miss a gorgeous morning like this, because now you don't know where your vehicle is, you think somebody stole it. And we do have a problem in the state of Texas. I do believe it'll eventually get addressed, but only after a few state legislators get their vehicles towed because their inspection sticker had expired and they're parked at an apartment complex, or almost all these apartment complexes throughout, I need to go this way, throughout Corpus Christi, contracted with one, or primarily one, it seems, company, but they could do it with any, and they give them the right to patrol their parking lot where their tenants are. And if anybody has, they don't position it like this to begin with, so they don't want to run you off, but if any of your stickers are out of date on your vehicle, then the tow truck company has a right to tow you out of this private parking lot from the apartment complex that you're paying money to rent an apartment from. And somehow somebody thought that this was cool. So that's why if you go by an apartment building or complex, you see all these vehicles lining the side of the street, because that's not the property of the apartment building, and therefore they can park out there without fear of having their vehicle towed until they get enough money, or until they get to where they can go and get another inspection sticker. It's the biggest scam I've ever seen in my life, and I'm sure I'm probably ticking off some tow truck drivers. I don't mean to do that, but there's not many who are playing that game, although everybody wants to play it if they can, because nobody cares about being hated, despised, or what their ethics may or may not be in a situation like that, because it's so lucrative. By the way, that is a gorgeous sunrise, and probably was a little bit better if I'd have been here a little bit sooner, but we're still going to go up and take a picture of it. And I'm thinking some of these lower streets may be pretty awesome as well. There's a lot of great shots. Bear with me here. We've got a pretty cool scenic route, I think, anyway, as it goes. We'll switch ourselves back around so you can see. And I don't know what I keep doing with that makes it brighter and darker. But I'm going to have to figure that out, because I'm just hitting the reverse switch on the camera button, and that should just reverse it. I have not seen any indication about that giving me a brighter aperture of sorts. But anyway, so Donald Trump, and I say this, for those who are, I don't get personally that upset about things as much as I used to, primarily because I've lived through Barack Obama and Bill Clinton, and I don't care what they said about being moderate, slightly to the left of center. Dang it. Hold on just a second. I'm going to have to undo my belt buckle so I can get over here. Oh, shit. And then it's already up. Oop. Hold on. There we go. I got somebody behind me. It always makes me nervous when I do that, because I hate to be the person causing other people to wait. And so anyway, it's a gorgeous sunrise, beautiful morning. And if you haven't gotten outside to see it, I'll show it to you. You can stay inside and stay cuddled up, because it's like 40 degrees outside, and I don't know how in the heck anybody expects you to go anywhere without taking 2 full sets of clothes these days, because you never know. I mean, if you're on vacation and you think you're going to go to the sunny beaches, well, you can forget about that. It's not that time of year. But you think you're going to bundle up for winter, you're going to be sweating yourself to death because we're going to have heat. But that aside, as we look at some of these things, remember this: every time you want to start trying to blame whose fault it is that we have a government shutdown, Republicans or Democrats, that seems, and this is the sad thing, it seems sadly to be detached from the responsibility that you and I have. Because here's the deal: Democrats and Republicans are only doing what their constituents want them to do, okay? So if you and I and everybody else had a better plan or a better idea, then we should make it vehemently clear, and we wouldn't have that kind of gamesmanship being played. And then you have to realize in some instances it may be as simple as this. Maybe the truth is the country is that divided on what we should do with the money that we have. Don't forget, budgets are like this. It is limited resources. We don't have an unlimited amount of money, even though many people think that we do. If we just tax the rich, no. I mean, I don't tell you. I can't tell you how many times it's been attempted and tried. No matter how many calculations, you could take all the money away from everybody that's in the top economic bracket in this country and redistribute it, and it still wouldn't mean much to anybody. You would probably make more money if you got a part-time job and worked a day, and that's, again, if you distribute it to everybody. If you give it back to the taxpayers, it would mean a lot, those people who actually pay the taxes, and then we could grow the economy. But then everybody's like, well, where's mine? I don't want to do that if I don't get mine. And then it's all that whole, we're used to everybody getting a birthday present just because it was your older brother's birthday and you didn't want to get left out. You know, that's why maybe parents mess up with that. It's like they don't want to hear the younger kid cry, and they know it's going to be tough, so they go ahead and get him a present for a few years, even when it's not his birthday. And still, the first time they don't do that, it's hell to pay. So, I mean, I think that some of the stuff we do in this country creates a nanny baby type of situation in our thinking. See, look at that. Oh, that's just awesome. I'm going to take a quick picture or two. Hope you don't mind, but it's just a gorgeous day out. And before all that color goes away, let's see if I can't grab. I got my 50 millimeter Zeiss coated Sony, which operates very much like a G Master, and that's because Sony makes the glass for Zeiss, but Zeiss still does their exclusive coating, and that's why it's such a cool deal. But I got to tell you, it is just an absolutely gorgeous sunrise out there today, and I am loving the colors. Wait till you see this later. I'll show you these pictures later so that you're not left out. And but man, oh man, it is just absolutely gorgeous. But I got to take this picture quick before the colors change. And man, I mean, it's just when you get these kind of oranges and reds in the sky, it makes for such good pictures. And there's a ranch nearby that has gotten a lot of attention called the Elkhorn Ranch, and they do a lot of parties, weddings, all that kind of good stuff. And so my buddy Adrian with Inspired Coastal Bend magazine asked if I wanted to go shoot some pictures of it, and I was like, heck yes. You know, how many different ways yes do I need to say that? Because the place is gorgeous, and apparently owned by a doctor or something like that, as I understand. And it was his hunting lease, hunting property, hunting ranch that he owned, and he decided that he was gonna create a big cabin-like place. If you can have weddings, bar mitzvahs, birthday parties, whatever else you want to, getaways. And so they have done a great job of it, especially with, it's not easy to find the place. You know, it's kind of off the beaten path, and if you're used to looking for hunting leases, then it's no problem. But if you're not used to that sort of thing, it can be a little tricky. But I'll tell you this, once you get there, it's well worth it. The place is gorgeous, and they have also, it would be like, I guess, Texas oil opulence may be one way to describe it. And it's one of the things that, I mean, some people may not like that, but I mean, I do. It's got big antler chandeliers made out of elk horns on it. You've got rolling hills. They have all sorts of exotic animals that they have stocked around it for you to see and pet and be entertained by. And it really is just a lot of fun for anybody of any age, the whole family. And they had a wedding fair there last year at the Elkhorn Lodge. That's first place. The reserve at the Elkhorn Lodge is what it's called, actually. Like, it's the reserve. But look at that. That is awesome. Where else are you going to get that? That's your sunrise. So even those of you who are not up yet, and please share this live broadcast. You'll get a chance to see what it looks like as that sun is coming across the horizon. A little bit more color a little earlier, but that is just awesome. And of course, this is the Wilson Plaza Building's top floor parking garage level, where they put the VIPs. Those are the very, I don't know, irritating people, because the good spots are down below where you don't have to walk all this way. But I thought I would still enjoy it, because you do get the best spot here. It's like, I say this, if you're doing everything right, your intention is to help other people, which is what it should be. Whatever your business is, if you're offering a product or service, whatever you do for your business, it's likely that it's to help other people in some way. Plumbers, electricians, mechanics, social media marketers, whatever it is that you do, you're there to help somebody else, right? So focus on doing the best job you can for that, and everything else will take care of itself. I mean, you know, you've got to make sure and send out billing, stuff like that. I've realized that if you don't send a bill to people, they don't pay it because they don't have it. And, well, sometimes they'll pay something even if they don't, but rarely. And so you got to do that. If you're good at something, you should get paid for it. But focus first and foremost not on how much money you're making, but on how you're helping somebody else in the way that you're supposed to. Then you can go from that to realizing that even if somebody else is not giving you, man, I might have to take another picture of that. Oh, look at that. As I eat a gummy. That's awesome. Beautiful. I could turn you around so you get the full effect of the prime lens. This this happens to have a pretty good lens. It's a little bright. Still looks pretty awesome though. Look at that. Anyway, I may have to take another picture only because there's so much red. Maybe I was about to leave prematurely. So, make it a point to realize that I was being sent to the top floor here because I didn't pay extra for a reserved spot. But fortuitous it was, because although you get a pretty good shot from down below, this is even better. And I've got about 20 really good, fantastic photographs from the 4th elevation. And I think this is the 7th. So, I mean, look at that. Well, clear skies, gorgeous day, and maybe I shouldn't go in right away. We should talk about a new sunrise in Donald Trump. Before you get too prematurely angry at our so-called politicians, keep in mind they're representing the people, and also keep in mind that everybody has a right to their own opinion. If you don't respect the right of others to have their own opinion without you blaming them for all the failures and follies of whatever's happening in the country, then we're going to have unrest. I mean, what keeps us peaceful and civil, I'm afraid to say today, in the United States of America, is not the respect that should be there for people's difference of religion, political opinions. You know, we always think that everything that happened in the past, and the further in the past that it went, the more barbaric it was. Yeah, except for issues of religion. You realize that, like Benjamin Franklin, he donated money all the time to the synagogue, the mosque, and the churches there in Washington, D.C. And he did all that because he was a religionist. You know, he, for the first and foremost, believed that the more that we have in the way of people going to church or churches, the better off we'll be, because we'll have fewer people doing ridiculous shenanigan stuff, and you know, they'll be raised right with a little bit more accountability or concern for what happens to them beyond what they get caught doing. I mean, that's really kind of one of the great things about religion. One has to acknowledge to some degree is that beyond what you may believe or not, it used to be recognized more so that all your major religions adhered to some basic values that we could all agree on. You know, don't kill somebody unless they're threatening your life. Thou shalt not murder is what the Ten Commandments say. It was erroneously translated by King James, who gave the world one of his greatest gifts, the King James Bible, and translated into thou shalt not kill. Problem with that is that it would make everything that goes on in the Bible hypocrisy. There would be no wars. There couldn't be any elimination of people who were violently murderous, whatnot, no capital punishment. And they clearly had all of that at the same time that you were hearing the, you know, people with the thou shalt not kill. It's thou shalt not murder, which is the wrongful taking of an innocent life. And that's verified in the ancient Greek and Aramaic versions of the scripture that are still, still survived, I guess, archaeologically. And some of that was also validated in 1948 when the Dead Sea Scrolls were discovered. I may be off on that date just slightly, but the Dead Sea Scrolls were a zealotous sect of Judaism, or early Christianity, it seems, and they had taken copper, which was precious because it was somewhat rare, or very rare, made like pieces of paper out of copper, though, scrolls, and they wrote the scripture by indenting into that copper. Then they put them in jars and hid them because they believed that, well, I mean, we're not 100% sure. They think that it's because they believed in an Armageddon or an end of days scenario, but it very well could have been that other people were beating up on Christians because they didn't like this new religious sect, and so with that, they might have been under attack, hid them. They were under attack, they got killed, and then they were forgotten about until some small sheep herder child was stumbling through the rocks trying to free a wandering goat, sheep, something, falls through a hole, discovers a cave, or he doesn't actually fall through a hole, he kind of stumbles into it, and is on a cliff face, and then finds these Dead Sea Scrolls. And so, very interesting group of people that were there, and fascinating stuff. But anyway, so, knowing what you're talking about always helps to some degree, even if you go off on a tangent. Marco Electronics, again, a lot of these beautiful sunrises, sunsets you could capture yourself and see what I'm talking about. With the Sony A7 and A6500 series, I go for the big dog because I take pictures for other people to highlight the quality of their product, their services, what they do, and I use it a lot. But a lot of professional photographers are going with the step down, the A6500, because it's smaller, lightweight, but it still uses, and you can still put these big lenses on it. Dun, dun, dun. It's like a big thing. But yes, it's even a smaller body than this, and guys and gals that are photographers have been doing it a while, and they have older, full-size cameras, professional cameras. They immediately would not think this is a professional camera. This looks almost, obtuse in that you've got this, obtuse. It looks absurd. You got this huge lens and a little camera body, but it gives you so much more capabilities. If you want to put an extended battery pack and thumb grip on it, which you can, it basically has 3 batteries in one. It doesn't take up nearly as much space, and it's so much more enjoyable to use. And here we're all the way up, and on top of Old Corpus Christi, looking out here, that we've got gorgeous, gorgeous stuff. I can see all the way to Ingleside, which is across the bay, where you see the red coming from. And over there is where they construct and erect the large superstructure and substructure even for the oil wells and oil drilling that they have offshore. And in fact, the largest in the world was built out there back in 1994, I think. Bullwinkle is what it was called. It was enormous, and you could see it from this far away. You don't have the naked eye gives you a little bit better view, but I can see individual structures, and I can even see the big airplane hangar-like construction facilities where they do the beginning work of it before they have to move it outside because it gets too big. And that's the stuff you see offshore with the oil rigs, where the big pipe legs come out and form this superstructure with a landing pad on it. They have their own workout room and whatnot. People are stuck on that. I say stuck. It's a good job if you can get it, but they're out there working for weeks at a time before they get to come back into shore. And they even have, some of those have some very rudimentary ways of getting you on and off those smaller ones, like a net that hangs over the edge of a helicopter, and the helicopter will hover while you get off, and maybe they do the same thing for climbing up. I think it's kind of cool. Anything that's got a little bit of a danger to it, I tend to gravitate towards because I like that sort of thing. But I'm one of the few people that I know of that both enjoys an adrenaline rush and then also just chilling and not doing much of anything, but kind of recharging and building up your your reserves to go do stuff. It's more than just taking a nap and having some sleep. It's about, sometimes you just have to stop occupying your mind with everything under the sun. I'm about ready for that now because I've been working to get Armory Outfitters USA, which is one of my lifelong dreams, to have a cutlery store. I have loved knives my entire life, and even though I have enormous impediments, unfortunately, with
with advertising it because we have now decided to have knife control in the United States of a freaking America. I never thought I would see the day where a tool, yeah, you could use it for wrong, just like you can a car. And I can promise you, when you do the ratio of times a knife or a blade is used for purposes of benefit to people, saving lives, or just getting the job done they have to do every day, it is far outweighs the number of times somebody is hurt by a criminal or a rapist, or as I saw somebody spell the other day, a rapist. I wouldn't want to be attacked by a rapist either. I mean, spelling is not the end-all be-all of things, but I've seen misspelling become the greatest source of entertainment. Unfortunately, don't be one of those, by the way. Little tidbit here. How to not cause unrest in civilization. Do not be one of those individuals that in the midst of a debate about politics, Donald Trump, whether or not, he's ruining this country. I mean, I hear so many of these doomsday phrases that cause you to lose credibility with mature, rational people whom you need to be persuaded to join whatever the position is you're trying to convince people of. Saying absurd, asinine things to impress those who already agree with you, like you just threw a right punch. It's not the Def Comedy Jam. It's not a cut down contest. It's not a your mama cut down contest. That's where you give all those extra stingers and whatnot. If you're actually, you can have flavor, have swagger, personality, but you saying that he's Satan or he's a Nazi and all this name calling, that's a distraction. And maybe that's what you hope to do because you have a lot of emotion but not a lot of facts. You need to get some facts. It's not that hard to do. The learning curve takes a little bit to get caught up on. Like I was saying earlier with politics, everybody thinks, oh, it's so difficult. I can't possibly, get involved in politics or know what's going on. Politics, and the one thing they follow this up with, politics don't affect me. You are so wrong. You are benefiting from the labor of myself. I feel like a lot me. That's not rational, but I feel like it's a lot me because I've spent so many years staying up on what's going on in the world, what the specifics are of this particular thing or that, and other people who write letters in the form of emails now to their congressmen and let them know how they feel about issues. Congress people will either not vote in some instances or decide to change a vote if enough of their constituents are in opposition to what they're doing. Because if they don't, what ends up happening? They will lose the next election. And politicians don't want to lose next elections. And you know why? Because that means all the fun and all the money that they have and that they get from everything is gone. A lot of it, popularity, but yes, indeed, not to validate every pessimist's mentality, there's personal gain to come from it as well. And you're never going to get rid of it. And a lot of it that people complain about, not all of it, but a lot of it, is something that the alternative to doing would create more opportunity for corruption. And that's Democrats, Republicans across the board. It's not easy to do that job if you're staying in there at all. You're working well enough to earn the $100 and some odd thousand, $211,000, whatever it is they pay you a year now. But politics affect every aspect of your life. I don't know. Give me an example, something you could say, oh, Eric, what about like skateboarders? Well, I don't know, the politics of local government. They say all politics are local, meaning that that's where it really hits home. Do they allow you to skate in different places? Do they facilitate a skate park? Do they invest in things like that? Or do they not want you around at all? Politics has everything to do with that. Again, are they going to start licensing you, charging you a fee in order to skateboard because of the damage that you do, allegedly, they would say, to other concrete structures, curbs, things like that? All you got to do is watch an episode of Ridiculousness and see that things can get broken, not just on you, but elsewhere if you're a skateboarder. I'm not picking on skateboarders. I just brought that up because that was a person I heard one time, a young adult still skateboarding, that was saying, politics didn't affect him. He's really not interested in politics at all. It's like, well, name something that you do. If you eat food, politics affects you. The political forces that we have decide what kind of food we're going to grow, when we're going to harvest it, how much we're going to... they give subsidies for people not to grow food because we don't want to oversaturate a market with one particular year where, I don't know, the oranges were doing really good. Or, all the complications that you hear about the stock market and trading pork bellies as an example. I never knew pork bellies were such a big deal. but they are, because they're used in a lot of cooking that we don't even see. You realize that pre-prepared food, they have to cook with the same stuff that other people do in most cases. Then they may dehydrate it or freeze dry it, but pork bellies make the world go round. And so those things, it all matters. Now, you don't have to know all the intricate details of the stock market. That's not where I would say to begin with. But when you hear about President Trump and the Democrats having a disagreement over where to spend money, it behooves you to actually get involved, because people who are on YouTube or talk radio show hosts or television analysts, you may think that they have lots of power, but really they don't. What they're doing is giving you the ammunition, or whomever pays attention and follows these things, to reiterate it later, oftentimes not citing a source, saying it as if it was said by them. And the people who go around reiterating it make the mistake of thinking that the person they're debating is the person they're going to change the opinion of. That's never going to happen, except in rare cases. I've had it happen a few times, even on Facebook. But the reality is that rarely happens. What you have to consider, and this is absolute fact, the people who are persuaded by the strongest argument are not the ones having an argument or a debate. An argument's not a bad word in the classic Greek sense of things, but everybody assumes that it's a negative, so we'll throw our debate in there because people think that's more civil. It's all depending on what you want to do. You can be very uncivil in a debate as well. But it's the people who are listening and not talking. Those are the ones who are measuring the strength of your argument against the other or others. Usually it was me arguing against a professor and a bunch of panty waist kiss up college students who wanted to impress the professor without ever having to do any extra work and or know what they're talking about. I always wanted to come back to class knowing what I was talking about, and I would challenge the professor on things that they said that were political indoctrination, that were in many cases just wrong or incomplete, and they were, college professors oftentimes make the same mistake everybody else does. They repeat what somebody else has said without actually having read it or seen it for themselves, or they go straight to a very biased source that doesn't care and is loose and fast with facts if they include any. And so just repeating opinion, that's fun, don't get me wrong, it's fun, but it's easily defeated if you do a little bit of work and finding out what's going on. Don't be one of those that does the dishonest distractionary tactic of, I'm going to critique somebody's spelling in an autocorrect. Look, you can have a little fun with it, but I would not discredit yourself by giving undue emphasis and time to trying to critique somebody's sentence structure or an obvious autocorrect or a they or there, because that's not really part of the argument. If you want to have an argument about spelling and grammar and who's the best at that, then start that off, and then that would be the appropriate time to do that. I say it only because everybody, I don't care how good you are at your grammar or how much time you take and care and using the right there and there, the technology we have today is eventually going to cause you to screw up. And if you're going to have an ongoing, regular, fast-paced, energetic, heated exchange via messenger, text message, chat board, whatever it may be, don't be one of those that ruins the fun of the subject matter that's being debated and the facts by using that go-to on the other side of it. So, that would be my bit of recommendation for you. You'll have more fun and you'll actually get better at things. But politics affects everybody. Do not be one of those that foolishly makes the statement that is so obviously incorrect. Man, there's a whole nother sunrise on the other side, and I have to get a picture of that before I go too. So this is why it takes me forever to go places. But there, between these two buildings, if you see that glistening gold, that is City Hall. That is the county courthouse. City Hall's to the left of it, and you can't see it because of this big building right there. But that would make kind of a cool shot, I do think. Maybe we just take a quick picture here, because although I don't know if you can see all these colors, when I get done taking the picture, you will be able to. And that's kind of cool with the sun glistening off of that building, and it's not going to last much longer. So, I personally think, look, the best news is everybody gets to keep making money right now because the furlough has been averted. And everybody's going to get to go back to work today. And that's always a good thing. And let's see if they get this picture going. I always like to shoot things in manual focus mode because sometimes, and this one here, I didn't want to keep you guys waiting, but autofocus and auto, everybody feels comfortable with that because they can't screw anything up. It doesn't take much at all anymore with a digital camera. Marco Electronics can show you all this to learn how to do photography with some degree of proficiency, so that you can get even better shots, because if you shot this at the appropriate exposure, you would not see that color. Now you could fix that in Photoshop and editing, but the closer you are to having it look the way it seemed to your naked eye, this is my general thing, the closer you are to making it look as you did with your naked eye, the less you have to tweak and the better your photo will come out. Little tidbit there. You want to get as close to what you see with your naked eye as you can, and so adjusting exposure and your aperture sounds complicated. It's really not that bad though. And see, got to make sure I have both sets of keys. I don't want to leave somebody the keys to my truck. I've had it stolen once, and that was not a fun thing. Took forever to get it back, and I've learned the hard way that, unfortunately, and I tell you this, in South Texas, especially Corpus Christi, if your vehicle is stolen by somebody that you were once friends or involved with, you can forget about them taking the effort to actually try to track it down, regardless of the circumstances that may be different. That is all they need. So you don't want to let it get stolen. And although insurance and everything else can repay that, every time you have to make a claim, you're risking your insurance going up. And not only that, it takes time. And in that meantime, you're without a vehicle. So I don't recommend it. You should stay away from that. My thieves, like I said, interestingly enough, politics affecting everything. You know, how many people do you have in your particular area where you live that are assigned to, you know, catching people who steal vehicles? I think we have one. And so they can delegate and have other resources, but that's only one person. And so they're going to go for the low-hanging fruit, meaning to catch the ones that are easiest to catch, they think. But yeah, the perception that's given to the public is not one that is in the reality of where we are. That unless they get caught driving it around before they get it to wherever they're going to go, you're out of luck. And even then, my vehicle was abandoned for some strange reason. Not quite sure what it was, because it still had gas. I thought they'd run out of fuel at first, but they were in Rio Grande City. And ironically enough, I met a lot of great friends when I finally was able to get there to get my vehicle. And I met a guy who he owned 3 or 4 businesses, restored a lot of the historic buildings there, and was just the greatest guy to talk to. And I made friends with him because I took pictures of his fantastic looking bar. And one of the waitresses saw it and said, "Oh, you got to tell him." And at first, this guy, there's always some personalities. This guy pretended like he did not understand English, or he let on like he didn't quite understand. And then once he decided he liked me, he would not stop talking. And so this guy is like, I say this, we couldn't look any differently. I guess we both come from Texas, but this was like a 65-year-old Hispanic version of me. Basically the same thing, just 65 and Hispanic. And well, I already had a number of established businesses, so I was just a talk show host at the time. But his restaurant's fantastic there in Rio Grande City. Rio Grande City. And super nice guy. The police department there, super nice. The only thing was that they too were disinterested in the potential of going through my truck and cataloging any evidence or fingerprinting anything. They, like many others in Texas, closer to the border, are interested in large busts because that means significant revenue, and significant revenue for a city that is soon going to have some real issues because they didn't they didn't get in on the politics of fighting to make sure that that there was a highway that didn't leave them out in the boonies. So new highway coming through, and they've got about, I don't know, 10 years, but it's like 10 years needs to have started 15 years ago and what they're going to do to prepare for it, because once that highway goes around them, they're really going to be in bad shape. They've got tons of great things. I mean, there's a lot of mid-19th century buildings there. There's a lot of Civil War history in that area. They could do tons of stuff. I would love to be a part of a success story in revitalizing Rio Grande City. And the problem that you have, again, politics, is that you've got a divided council. It doesn't matter what party they're on here because there's different factions within the city. And as I was educated and illustrated by my new buddy there in Rio Grande City, their heels are dug in, and by the time they realize the true state of desperation and the need for them to work together, it's going to be too late. And so that, unfortunately, is a lesson that many cities have learned, and those cities are now a shadow of what they once were because they have been left in the dust. We would have been in the same situation except for one thing, that we have a beach here in Corpus Christi, and we have amenities that make us a destination. Although, you know, we let things slip too, like a lot of other cities that see the opportunity. You have to be good at selling it, and you have to have the trust of the people in order to sell it to them. And we did not have that. We had a 20-year stretch of history in which a lot of things were promised and never delivered. And so taxes even were, we had bond elections and things here in Corpus Christi. This is back in the 80s. And none of it was taken care of. Now, the defense of the city officials at the time, like many government officials, would be that, well, that money's, you know, not been spent. We didn't do anything with it. So, yeah, but now we're talking about 20 years of riding along. My grandparents, it was 1984 bond election. My grandparents voted for it. They both died before it was finally completed. And when it was, by the way, the trust that was restored at that moment, and a lot of hard work going into other things, brought us forward to start doing a lot of things that made our area a place that people wanted to come. We started investing in Oprah Channel. So we had Packery Channel, and then we had loaned some money to, and now I think we have maybe continued to do a little bit of that, but we have a great aquarium that's expanded and grown. You know, maybe one of these days it'll be like a SeaWorld. It's already got a lot of cool stuff, though. It really does. And it struggled, you know, with a soft amount of activity. We have the USS Lexington, which was a World War II aircraft carrier that went into service still until I think the early 90s before it was decommissioned. And then it was brought here. We acquired that. And it's been a great museum as well as tourist attraction. It looks great in photos, for sure. And, you know, we've got a new harbor bridge coming in, which will be huge. I mean, the other one is well old. It's an iconic image for people coming into our ports, seeing, they call it Napoleon's hat. But, I mean, we've got a number of things that are finally happening. I've been an advocate for replacing the harbor bridge for a long time, and I've been talking about it, I think, since the early days of my broadcasting career, which went on for about 23, 24 years. Now, finally, they're beginning to start changing things up, and soon it won't be there. I've taken a number of pictures of it, long exposures at night, got some great stuff, and for a while I thought maybe I've taken too many pictures of the Harbor Bridge. I mean, every day there was like, something cool to do, and it was right out the window of my studio. And so, but now, no, I don't think that I took too many pictures of it. Because now I'm not in a position to conveniently take pictures of it on a regular basis, and I kind of miss it a little bit. There's certain things, like, of course, even the Corpus Christi Cathedral, which is historic as well, that we saw a little earlier with the two steeples. And I ended up taking a lot of pictures from that vantage point. I don't think that it's going to be replaced anytime soon, unless we have some horrible natural disaster, hurricane or something of the like. But things that you see on a regular basis, take time to appreciate it, because you never know when you won't be able to see or have that again anytime soon. I've got a number of things though that we can get into. Again, talking about Donald Trump, I'm glad to see that we've got people going back to work. And I'm glad to see that regardless of whose political team may not have come out on top with this one, everybody's jockeying for position to try to reposition it, I say. But in the end, the bulk of the people who were most concerned about this were those who didn't want to have to go through that very uncomfortable, contentious phase of not being able to pay their mortgage or their rent, or not being able to make their car payment or truck payment because they weren't going to get paid until government worked something out. And government shutdowns seem to have become a more common occurrence lately because of stalemate. And it's brinkmanship. It's what they call that, is brinkmanship. We're going to see who will go the longest, who can hold out the longest before their constituents or the pressure mounts to a degree that they don't want to put up with the heat anymore. And the further away you are from an election, the more willing people are to take heat for things, because quite honestly, if you've got another year to go or a bit more before the next election, and everybody blames your party and whatnot, and maybe even you for the government shutdown, you've got plenty of time to do other things. Now, if you don't do anything better than that, it's not the government shutdown in and of itself that's going to cause you to lose the re-election. It'll be that negative association with you and all the other things that you did that didn't pan out so well. It's really an aggregate of choices. Like I said, make good choices, get reelected. And you're going to make some mistakes from time to time. But nonetheless, when you when you have the economy going better, and that's my next question today, are we better off today than when Donald Trump was first elected? Because his reelection is going to be coming up. And apparently people think Oprah Winfrey is going to run. Well, Oprah, I mean, I love making reference to her, primarily ever since she was mentioned oh so briefly in Major Payne, which I thought was a great movie. I guess it was a family-oriented movie, but somebody was saying, well, what about our family? When he was going to get shipped off and go back into active duty as a ROTC instructor for a bunch of wayward youths, classic Bad News Bears type story, I guess, without the cigarette smoking and beer drinking, pot-bellied Walter Matthau. And so he's like, families break up. Don't you watch Oprah? Yeah, because Oprah used to be all part of that kind of a scenario before it was all about books and then giving giving Tom Cruise the opportunity to try to declare how much he loves a woman, so that the rumors of his other orientation might have some competition. The jumping up and down on the couch was a bit much for me. If you remember that, Family Guy did a great rendition of it, I thought, with Stewie playing the part of Tom Cruise. If you watch those things, but that said, I think that it's all going to come down to the same thing it came down to with Bill Clinton. Bill Clinton was smart enough to completely alter his course of economic strategy for the United States after the first midterm elections, when his pursuit of classic, I guess, liberal issues caused probably the greatest change or shift in political power in all of American history. And it was enormous. Bill Clinton himself, and I've had people argue with me about this, Bill Clinton himself made the point that it was his so-called assault weapons ban, which didn't amount to taking criminals' weapons away at all, and was simply a more cost-effective way of selling firearms at grossly inflated prices to a whole new majority of Americans who had never bought semi-automatic rifles before, or AR-15s, because they didn't, have a need for one at the moment. And now all of a sudden they thought they might never be able to get one before, again after this, so they went and bought them, and they bought them at ridiculous prices. And then, we had a lull for a little bit during the Bush administration, but once again, when it was quite clear that there was truly an agenda denied by all the apologists for Barack Obama, that we would not be able to have our firearms, they tried another assault weapons ban. Again, if they're trying to reduce the amount of firearms in the country, they did enormously bad. They did the opposite of that. And so many people and liberals would say, well, then you should just shut up about it and be happy. Well, for one, I'm just talking to you about it. I'm not badgering you about it. Two, it's not, I think that's a good thing. The more people who actually use a firearm, have a firearm, the less likely the false facade of an argument that somehow these inanimate objects are going to cause. And I've seen articles written by people before saying that they cause homicidal tendencies, and you're just much more likely to go kill somebody. And the people who are much more likely to do that were much more likely to do it before. You just didn't get to that point where they were going to, and gun control isn't going to stop that. The only thing it's going to do is prohibit the law-abiding citizens from being able to protect themselves, because there's always somebody new who's coming up, who's never had, the living situation or the threat to need one. And so, you see it even now with knives. It's like, who would have ever thought a knife like this is, I believe this is called the Lightning Kukri. And it's got, a lot of great craftsmanship in the artwork of it. And it truly is artwork with a Damascus steel like that, blended together. We offer these things at Armory Outfitters. But this tool that has a history behind it that is fascinating. It'll tell you a whole lot about the world, not just the United States, but the world. Tools like this created this country on a daily basis. Firearms are a constitutionally protected right, don't get me wrong. And I probably would maybe have more of a shift in emphasis on that if I had a firearm business, which I don't. But the truth of it is, I think even firearm dealers would tell you is that the knife is used, you can't shoot open a box. I mean, you could, but it's not really practical. You can't shoot off every limb you need to when you're trying to make a trail somewhere, or tie off timbers that you're building your house out of. I mean, whether you're cutting stalks off of corn, or whether you're, this knife, of course, camera oftentimes gives it a look of much longer blade, but this is really, I think, an 8-inch blade. But it, it has the ability with the guard on just the forward side to let you choke up on it, to use it to cut things, rope, twine, line, whatever it may be. And, we think that, these things only serve a purpose now for people who are in farming and agriculture or ranching, those sorts of things. And certainly, if you have any time spent in the outdoors, a full-size knife, we call these a Bowie knife now, has an increased amount of use. But you can use them anywhere around the home and elsewhere because they're handy and they're more easily portable and they carry a sharper edge to do any number of things. From quartering up things that you're going to cook for dinner to working in the backyard. A knife is a tool. And when I use them, they get used as that. There's a few that I have for self-defense purposes, and I try to minimize my use of those so that the edge and the properties of that stay very sharp. But there are people in this country who will use a blade like most of you never will. This steel is hard enough and is crafted well enough that likely, unless you are, a person who spends a significant amount of time out in the wilderness, you're probably never going to sharpen this down into where you need to get a new knife. But that's the way it used to be in this country. You bought a knife, and the steel was never as good as this in the days in which people had to rely on it. These great improvements. And you would use that thing until when you'd sharpen it over and over again, the blade would eventually get worn down into something that lost its shape and usefulness in the shape. This is great for a draw cut because it has a belly here, and then it slopes down here, so that if you're coming across something, it's going to aid in the slicing power of this blade. And it's very well balanced. It's got a camel bone handle, which is unique in its properties. Very dense, and of course, water buffalo horn that gives it a particular look. Having a knife that you can readily identify as yours because of its unique nature, and then of course one that you know has got great edge holding ability so that it doesn't have to be sharpened as frequently, and at the same time flexible enough so that it does not break. You don't want to use them as a pry bar on heavy duty work because it's sharp and slipping and cutting yourself becomes an issue. But tools like this, now, we think we're going to make the world safer by denying the advertisement or the success of businesses, or hindering or trying to create as many obstacles as we can. If you're talking about using this as a weapon to go and commit a crime, a murder, I mean, you can be one of the dullest tools in the shed and figure out that you can go and sharpen any piece of anything, scrap metal, and make a knife out of it that will do the job just as well. I mean, it's absurd. And criminals aren't going to go out and buy, even at the great prices we have on these, far more affordable than you would find anywhere else, ArmoryOutfittersUSA.com. Then, I mean, they're not going to go spend this kind of money. If anything, they'll get something cheap that doesn't hold a good edge, because it doesn't have to go commit a crime, and utilize something that they could throw away and they're not going to miss and not get caught with it if necessary. You're not stopping anything. You're not reducing violence. It's absolutely absurd. The argument that some social media platforms like Facebook have used, that it's highly regulated in some states, those states are making the same sort of emotional errors in decision that anybody else would, that says, well, we're not going to allow these to be advertised, even though it's a legal, lawful business, because some states have high regulation on it. Well, you can filter that out, and those regulations are incumbent upon, if anything, the seller and the buyer more particularly, because they're the ones responsible for taking the action. And, if you live in California, you can't have a whole lot of fun in California without going through a whole lot of red tape. I mean, the days in which, you had the freedom. I mean, if you think about this, and I say this, okay, why do we have, and we just accept this is a horrible shock. I know a lot of you are going to think, Eric, you're advocating for something. That's just absurd. I'm not advocating for anything. I'm just telling you the way it was. Prior to 1964 or so, 65, you could order guns through the mail. You had to show, or provide them some sense that you were of age to purchase them, but you could order stuff through the mail. And there were a lot of World War II and even then World War I military surplus stuff that people were ordering through the mail. And we're getting, we think they were so cheap, but you have to look at what people were making back then too. They were inexpensive because there was a ridiculous amount of them that we had stocked up, and we were giving opportunity for other American or business entrepreneurs to buy these things up. Italian Carcanos and German Mausers, even we had a program for military rifles and handguns used in the United States military, and they would sell them back to the American public. And the easiest way to do that was not to have a brick and mortar store, but the version of online back then was in the back of your magazines and comic books or other such things, and you'd pay for these things through the mail. You could buy ammo through the mail. It was after the assassination of John F. Kennedy, who today the Democrats would never have ever allowed to be a Democrat, because he was far too conservative with all the things that he did. But after his assassination, that's when they said in an emotional reaction they were going to stop people from buying firearms through the mail. Well, Lee Harvey Oswald would have still been able to get a firearm. And I know a lot of people like to believe in the conspiracy theories. There's really not a conspiracy theory if you look at the evidence. And if you can't watch JFK the movie and get an idea about whether or not there's a possibility of a conspiracy theory, because they, as many others, have misrepresented the findings of the Warren Commission on numerous instances. Now, I believe there's a conspiracy involved, a true conspiracy, but it's not about covering up Lee Harvey Oswald. I do believe, and people will get all upset about this, I'm an ardent skeptic of conspiracy theories. But there is one that is very difficult to deny, and I believe it has a likelihood of being successful, and that is that the final and third shot that was fired that struck President Kennedy in the back of the head was an accidental discharge of a newer rifle that was available to the United States government, the M16, and it was leveled in reaction to the sounds of gunfire by the trailing car, and an FBI agent that accidentally, that's why I train everybody that I shoot with, never to put your finger on the trigger in any instance until you're ready to shoot. It only takes a fraction of a moment to move it, and that is your safety. It's never, and you have to develop a habit to lay that finger along the side of the weapon, not on the trigger. And, he racked it, and I believe that he had an accidental discharge of one shot, and the entry hole, the diameter of it in the skull, and all the other forensics would back that up. And the man who discovered all of this and who tried to write a book about it had everything you could possibly imagine come up in ways to try and stop him. It seemed that there was clearly an effort to stop that conspiracy theory from moving forward. And I think that the government, the federal government, would much rather have a conspiracy theory about much more bizarre and impossible things than that it was indeed Lee Harvey Oswald. He tried to assassinate a general about a month before using the same Italian Carcano. He only probably fired 2 shots because the 3 shell casings that were found in the book depository in Dallas, Texas, one of them was showing clear signs of not having been fired recently. Oftentimes an empty casing was used as a chamber plug to keep moisture from getting into there, and rust, because the metal back then was much more susceptible to that. And so I believe that that's most likely what happened in that whole situation. But because of that one instance, with a guy that, there was nothing that was going to stop Lee Harvey Oswald from becoming famous in his mind. This was a guy that wanted to do something that he would be known for, something big, and because everybody else was a capitalist and a rabid anti-communist, he was running around doing interviews on radio and television and supporting communism. Of course, if I was a radio personality back in the day, I would have definitely wanted to have this guy on, because it would have riled everybody up, as it always did. And so, but because of, we didn't have rampant shootings. Think about this. Anybody in this country could order a firearm through the mail. Why didn't we have more school shootings? Why didn't we have all of the things that we're worried about today that we use as argument to enforce gun control back then? What was the deal? And you have to realize, because there wasn't this, we're restricting something that's not a part of the overall problem. And you realize that there's no shutting down the problems of crime committed with firearms or knives by denying them to people who want to legally go and purchase them. In fact, if you legally go and purchase any of these knives, you're leaving a paper trail tracing it back to you. So if you use it in some sort of crime, there's a process in which there's a legal right to go follow it up and find out who you are and connect it to you, and there you have it. Of course, in this day and age, with terrorists and whatnot, they don't care what consequences happen to begin with, which makes them these restrictive laws and policies even more absurd, because these folks don't care what happens to them after they commit the crime, because they plan on taking themselves out when they get done. If you don't plan on surviving after you've done something, why do you don't care about the consequences? And that's the thing that is slow even for many people who operate on a more emotional position to get their mind around. All these laws and penalties are only going to deter people who care about being around afterward. These folks don't care about being around. So I say that it's amazing to me. People are killed far more often with cars, and yet we don't want to advertise knives, but you can advertise cars all day long, trucks, whatever it is. Like, okay, to put a fine point on it, bombs to make explosives that can do great damage have always been illegal unless you had a particular license and a need for it. Yet the Oklahoma City bomber was another. I mean, that was the impetus for Bill Clinton's gun control movement, and it was a bomb. It was just a shifting of the knee-jerk emotional reaction to try to take advantage of it, and most of your constitutional-minded individuals are more reactionary than they are proactive. So because they didn't believe that it was actually going to happen, I can't tell how many people were amazed. That passed? Yeah, that passed. It's going to go into effect. And then the rush was on. And I'm sure it won't be too long into the future until we have a similar thing for knives. I almost, of course, when it comes to importing and other such things, presidents can shut that down without having to go through a vote. So they could create a lot of hardship for us, especially with this international deal, which, again, you would think liberals would love the idea. But it goes to what I said earlier in the show today. It's not about the idea, really, although whoever's not in power without the idea and the concept at the time makes the biggest fuss over how bad it's going to be and how no good all that, whatever it is the other party wants to do is going to affect us. It's going to be bad. And they oppose it. And then in about another 5, 7, 8 years, maybe 10 at the most, somebody on the other side of the aisle will come up with that idea when they're in power, and now all of a sudden, it's slightly modified maybe, but now the whole thing's not bad. It's all good. Even though they didn't, Bill Clinton signed a balanced budget that the Republicans proposed and said it was a bad deal. He's going to have to come back and fix it. He didn't want to do it. He didn't bring it up. But after it was overwhelmingly popular with the American public, he never went back and fixed anything. Then it was just fantastic, and he did that. And he took credit for it like it was his idea. And I'm like, okay, that's how it works. But I'd be surprised if they don't have knife control or knife ban stuff before long. The city of Corpus Christi used to have a requirement that you couldn't have a knife over 2.5 inches. Which still, with the right design knife, 2.5 inches is devastating if you know what you're doing. And it still doesn't save us from any other degree of lethality. But all that came to an end back in September when the state of Texas passed a law that said you could openly carry swords, which is basically a knife of any length. Sounded really cool. I guess it'll be great for me on Halloween. But outside of that, most people are not going to carry around a full sword. And even if they do, you're going to go, looky there. There's somebody with a sword. I'll keep my eye on them. And you're just not really surprising anybody. So that being the case, we've got to start using our own common sense instead of just depending upon politicians and then blaming them like we're not a part of the equation if things don't go the way we want. We're a part of the equation. And in most cases, what you see are stalemates like what we just averted, or victories that represent at least a slim majority, if not a majority, of the American public's opinions. And we have elected people to go and make decisions on our behalf. That's what a republic is, because that we think that they represent generally what we would do. You don't always win, and so then it really kind of sucks for you if you don't have one of those type of people there, because they're not going to vote your way at all in most cases. But thank goodness from Texas, we seem to have on both sides of the aisle, Democrats and Republicans both, are very Second Amendment oriented. And that's because the people of Texas are. We like to hunt. Second Amendment's not about hunting, but any exposure to firearms or knives that may be greater than what you find in a very concentrated metropolitan area give you a greater sense of realism in your opinions instead of these horrible things. Don't touch that because it's going to make you want to stab somebody. No, it doesn't make me want to stab somebody. And even if I wanted to stab somebody, I'm not going to go stab somebody unless my life preservation depends upon it. But also, it wouldn't be the knife that made me want to do that. It would be the individual. And I don't know how we're missing all of that. But I think that what we've seen and what continues to go on, which people don't like, but I see and hear some interesting arguments on it, is that the amount of violent crime in this country has continued to decline since about 1978 or so, 77, 78, maybe 79. And it has continued to decline as we are seeing an increase in the possession of firearms. Well, I mean, you can't have both scenarios that work to your benefit as somebody who wants to ban or oppose these things and have those numbers. They've said, well, see, we can have gun control and there's plenty of guns out there. That's a weak, desperate stretch at the argument. I don't know who came up with that. The other is that we'll see that all your need of fear of being a victim of crime is irrational, and therefore you don't need the firearms. Well, you could say that, except that there would have to be some connection between we aren't seeing as many victims of violent crime and the fact that we have more firearms. Because if there were so many more firearms, then more criminals would be, you'd think, doing whatever it is they want to do. But mutually assured destruction, or MAD, which is what kept us from ever having a nuclear exchange with the Soviets, they were not going to try and make a first strike against us and dominate the world as they wanted to do if they knew that we would be able to strike back and we'd both end up blowing ourselves to hell and nobody wins. They wanted to win. The unfortunate aspect that we have to worry about today is that the enemy of today, the radical Islamist, the radical extremist Islamist, not to be confused with the regular guy who's Muslim, because I have Muslim friends who are very patriotic, probably more patriotic than some of you, in the sense that I don't know how many of you get up every morning and say the Pledge of Allegiance in your own kitchen. I don't even do that. I think I should start that, though. There are many immigrants that do that, though, who earn their citizenship through a test of knowledge and process that a lot of us would have some difficult time with. So, that said, there are many more, disproportionately more, people of the Islamic faith that have taken on the very peaceful and stringent application of what was last written by Muhammad. A little tidbit as well for you. The way, as I had talked with and interviewed an imam, a religious man, who was from our local mosque, and it was validated by all of the research too, that when Muhammad was going through his life, he had been instructed by the archangel of his purpose and of his need to do the things he needed to do. And in the early days, because of the process that they were going through and because of the times, he set down different rules for the followers of Islam. And that it was okay to basically do anything that you're not supposed to do if it furthers the cause of Islam. So if you needed to lie or mislead to get your enemy into a position of weakness in order to take advantage of it and then break your word and attack them, then that's what you needed to do. But what comes first is not what takes precedent in the Islamic faith. It's what comes last. And what can be somewhat confusing for people not familiar with the faith is that it's not written in order. The books of the Quran don't go from beginning to end. You have to know which books come in what order. So, although it's a little confusing, the things that were always known as a part of Islam were at the end of it. And that was that, if there was anybody who was unarmed, then you were didn't have a means to attack or defend themselves, then no matter what, you didn't attack them. If anybody surrendered, then it was forbidden that you even harm one green leaf on a single tree in their territory. So it had a much greater balance to it. What's happened with the Islamic extremists, it's a political movement hijacking a religion in order to gain fanatical followers, which estimated number may be anywhere from, I think, 850,000 in the world, and Islam is one of the largest religions in the world, if not the, and 850,000 and I don't know, 1.1 million or something like that of radicalized extremists who have been indoctrinated, brainwashed into this concept that the times that are existing now replicate the times in the early days of Muhammad, in which anything was a go as long as it was to benefit Islam or Islamic people. Lying, breaking your word, tricking people, whatever it was. And so that argument, because of the dilapidated economics of many people there, is a seemingly acceptable argument. I mean, they've had family people die, not just of collateral damage from American bombs taking out terrorists, and the fact that many of them are illiterate, but they've had a lack of medical attention, a lack of income, and you've had, you see your wife and children starve into a state of ill health they can't recover from. If you see these things happening, the fighting factions amongst themselves even, and it becomes very easy to scapegoat all of this on the fact that they're being told they're allowing a country like the United States to exist and not have Islam as the absolute religion and law of the land. That's the short of why they hate us. The other is that they can't beat us when they want to, and so terrorism is the best thing, the closest thing that they have. In order to be successful at that, you have to have people who are willing to give up their life, oftentimes to kill one other person, but to do it in a horrific way that makes people lose the confidence and trust they have in the security of where they live or where they shop. That's what causes terror. When people are afraid of everywhere that they would go, there is nothing normal, because there's always this fear that somebody may have a bomb strapped to them, or somebody may come in with a Kalashnikov and open fire at the daycare. Horrible things that, thank goodness, we don't have to deal with. But countries like France have been dealing with it for a long time. And so, will it change? Well, what we saw is that the radical groups that were attacking us on 9/11, they got replaced by even more radical groups. We're not allowed to take a knife on a plane, but somehow 19 hijackers, mostly from Saudi Arabia — that doesn't mean Saudi Arabia attacked us, by the way. I don't know why that's a preoccupation, people. That just happen to be where they were born, their nationality. They can get on a plane with a box cutter. I flew all over this country in the mid to late 90s with a 5.5-inch folding knife, which is a big folding knife. I mean, nobody took it from me. I didn't try to stab anybody with it. I didn't even take it out of my pocket because there was no need. The country, we have this incorrect security blanket that we carry around with us like babies of the laws that we've been familiar with for most of, if not all of our adult life, if not all of our life. We can't buy firearms through the mail. Great, well, that's going to stop a whole lot of criminals. Does it really? Because we didn't have that many criminals doing the stuff that criminals want to do, we imagine, by ordering stuff through the mail. Now I guess it would be somewhat easier because we have everything digital, but gangbangers and the like, they're still not going to go get it themselves because they don't want to have to provide documentation as to who they are when they go to buy something they may use illegally. And here's the big kicker. Oh my goodness. I don't know how to explain it other than drugs. The drug trade fuels a substantial amount of the crime that we have in this country. It just does. And this is why a lot of people have advocated the legalization of marijuana, because with that, we eliminate what represents the bulk of the drug cartel's cash crop. The drug cartels, by the way, have been able to get by with a whole lot of stuff that's not really getting reported by the news, that's rampant. And, a lot of this stuff, I know you're having a hard time believing. I would too, I guess, if I hadn't seen it myself, because in our minds, we may think that there's some slant or bias in the media, but we would never imagine that it's as bad as it is. It's the same thing when it comes to how much law enforcement's going to do, as an example, when it comes to recovering your stolen vehicle. In our minds, we think it's going to be like Kojak. Maybe not Telly Savalas, but maybe people don't know who that is anymore. Beretta, nobody knows who that is anymore. I'm trying to think of somebody else that might be a police officer today. It's not going to be like Time Cop, that's for sure. RoboCop, maybe RoboCop soon. They do have some law enforcement robots now. Downtown Houston has one, but it just tells you about where things are going. It's a maintenance robot, and it can answer some questions, but it is not a RoboCop. It's not going to be like it is in television and the movies when it comes to police officers solving crimes and all the rest of that. In most cases, there's no way they have a boss and a superior that's assigning them a whole bunch of work, and they could never go on just another stakeout and spend all that time on one case because they've got other cases they have to work. And, you know, just because you're on something really exciting doesn't mean all those other cases go away. But, you know, I mean, the ability for us to defend ourselves with things like knives or firearms is a preoccupation of our defense of our right in order to possess those things. But the daily use of it is so much more, and, you know, it's hard to explain until all of a sudden you have a knife. I can't tell you how many women, and women are some of the fastest growing demographics who are buying cutlery, by the way. And they can go to ArmoryOutfittersUSA.com as well, ArmoryOutfittersUSA.com. But they're doing it because, well, for one, they have a purse so they can carry a knife a little bit easier, even though they're not carrying huge knives in general. But they're also the ones who are taking care of kids who want to have apple snacks or whatever else there may be out there that are cutting tangled knots out of shoelaces. And so having a good knife with you is is something that they can see benefit in. And a lot of us have just gotten tired of, I lost a great knife when I was at Rockefeller Center, New York, and I carried it all over New York with me, no problem. And so, you know, a lot of people might be a little amazed about that. I packed the knife in my luggage, and I flew with it. Nobody said squat. I don't know, they may now, but there was a time when they were allowing us to fly with pocket knives again. And I heard that announcement. I talked about it on my show at the time, and I haven't heard anything else from it at the time, so maybe they are, maybe they aren't. But nonetheless, you know, I only had trouble when they were going to put us through a metal detector because we're going to go to the top of Rockefeller Center, top of the rock, as they call it. It's a great view. And by the way, if you've never been, I highly suggest you go. I mean, they charge you a little bit to get up there, but the last tour is at like 11 o'clock or 11:30. It's a great time to go because all of the city's lights are brilliantly lit up, and if I'd only had my high-speed camera now, I mean, the pictures I took before, I took with this camera, and the phone that I'm talking to you on now, and it was a lot of fun. But I had the knife, and I thought they might miss it. It was missed at one other place. They didn't miss it, and but they weren't panicked either. The police and the security were really cool. They were like, well, they offered this. I don't even know if this doesn't sound like something they probably would be allowed to do if they had somebody supervising them. But they said, if you want, you can go back downstairs and try to stash it or hide it somewhere, and then when you get back, you can get it. But I'm pretty sure I wouldn't have been able to get all the way down and then back to this elevator at whatever floor it was that you had to go up to go to the top. So I ended up, I said, you know what? No way you guys, I mean, then they should have a check-in, you'd think. They have for cell phones and other stuff like that. You could have it for a pocket knife. But they wouldn't take it. They wouldn't let me give it to them. So I had to throw it in the trash can. It hurt me to do that. But I thought, well, you know, we're going to go and see the top of this, and I don't know when I'm going to be back. And I do have another one. So I did have a replacement. Luckily, of that one, I had a backup. And it was... it's a good design. Part of it has inspired me, to the pocket knife design I'll have constructed here very shortly. So you're going to be sending that off to my manufacturer and have them look at the aspect of it I'm wanting them to build off of, and then go from there. But that's be coming out soon. But I love to show you these things. One thing I thought I could go over a few more items with you, and I know this is new, so. As we talk about some of the issues out there today, remember Donald Trump is president of the United States because the majority of people voted for him. And they voted for him when all of the media was opposed to him getting elected. I don't think there was any real major number of people in the media saying we need to have Donald Trump. Quite the opposite. And then, on top of that, I have to say that I think a lot of them were surprised because he still got elected even after he put his foot in his mouth. With things. I mean, look, he does say offensive things. No doubt about it. He shouldn't do that. I wouldn't do it if it were me. But for all those who are really, truly just so upset about it that you're angry, keep this in mind. Every time we make absurdly irrational excuses and apologies for somebody who is doing the hokey pokey with a chunky intern in the Oval Office and has the audacity to say he didn't have sex with him, and then try to redefine oral sex that has sex in the name as not sex, and have a bunch of women across this country agreeing with him because they liked Bill Clinton, they thought he was so handsome, they had dreams about him, and he played the saxophone. And then their husband, if he went out and had one of these non-sex encounters, they certainly thought it was sex then. Felt kind of stupid about that. But nonetheless, when the pendulum swings that far in one direction, you're going to have a reaction of equal and opposite. And so that's what's really happened with Donald Trump, is that the country was sick and tired of how far to the left that Barack Obama had gone, and all of the stupid games that he played with being very friendly with communists and the Weatherman Underground and some of these other things that he made absurd excuses for that people bought into because they liked the way he voted on issues and they liked the political positions he took. So with that, he maintained his ability to get elected, and also because of the hyperbole, that would be the extreme reactions of people and over-exaggerated terms, it just discredited a lot of those who were complaining about what he did. I'm going to get some water here. But the reality of it now is his re-election is going to be based on one thing. And unless the American personality changes, it's going to stay for that one thing. And that is what kept Bill Clinton in office. How is the economy? Do you think that we're better off today than we were when he took office? Do you think that the jobs are improving? Is the stock market improving? I still think we got a little bit more to go on insurance. One of the big holdups, and I don't know if this is ever going to get fixed in the near future. It'd be nice if something were done, but everybody seems to be preoccupied, as I've said time and time again, on only part of the problem, which is stopping people from coming into this country illegally. For the overwhelming majority, it's not racism, it's not xenophobia. It really does come down to we are not filtering out the people nobody wants to have come in. And that's not the majority of people, but by the same token, think about this for a moment. You would have to imagine that there's more decent people, law-abiding, hard-working citizens in the world than there are criminals. There are. Many, many more. As an example, in the United States, every year there's a uniform crime report put out by the FBI. And with some flux, but pretty close to this, approximately 10% of the population commits 90% of the violent crime. Think about that. 10% is responsible for almost all of the violent crime. Now, that doesn't mean that the nonviolent crime is a non-issue. Trust me, you have your truck stolen or your house robbed, and it's pretty unnerving, okay? But with that small amount, it doesn't take many coming without scrutiny or screen, and you've got a problem. Also, though, this argument that we just need to let because most people are hardworking and they're not problems, so it shouldn't matter to us. I just showed you how it will. 10% of what we already have commits 90% of the violent crime. That has been declining, but we keep bringing in more people. We're not bringing them in. We're letting people come in illegally. And then once they get past 50 miles of the border, we really have a lot of things that facilitate and encourage the presence of people here illegally. And, California, as an example, there are two worlds that exist. One created by the media. The other is reality and hidden by the media. And that's not a conspiracy theory. I can prove it to you again. California, very liberal state, right? I mean, they have knife control over there. It's 50% of the excuse for why Facebook won't allow you to advertise cutlery. It's absurd. Or paintball guns either. It's because it says gun in it. But that said, California, very liberal. In 1995, 96, no, that'd be a little earlier than that. Maybe it was 1994 again. They had Proposition 187. I did a whole debate on this in college. I loved it because we mopped the floor with the opposition, who found out real quickly, when tested against somebody who knows what they're talking about, and facts, that it didn't hold water. It just didn't hold up. And Proposition 187 basically cut off all free stuff except for emergency things for people who were here illegally. So you couldn't go to the emergency room if you had a cold or you got a splinter. It was only for life-threatening issues. There was a movement at the time to issue driver's licenses, and maybe since it's been given, but to issue driver's licenses to people who were in the state of California illegally. And they did a bunch of studies on the cost of people illegally and what it does to public education, the contribution of space being taken up in the jails and prisons, and it was startling. And so Proposition 187 passed overwhelmingly. The liberal Supreme Court, though, because primarily California stays liberal due to gerrymandering of districts, which is the term used. There's a politician who was first famed for drawing creative boundaries to make a majority of Democrats in one particular area or another. It happened to be Democrats at the time, but I mean, it'd been used in every state by every party at one point in time. So with that, all of a sudden then everybody was opposed to it and talking about how it was racist, and one thing that they seem to overlook is that the very liberal population, or as we seem to see them, of California, and that, by the way, California has the highest percentage of people illegally in the country from Mexico. California, its Hispanic voters, 64% of them voted for Proposition 187 back in 1994 or so. At 64%, it couldn't be that it was all that many racists who are, at that percentage, who are voting for a measure because they see what it costs their state. Things in California are very expensive. They have rolling blackouts because of power problems. They want to blame that on deregulation. But really, they didn't fully deregulate the power in California. They only partially deregulated it. And so they affected what power could be sold for to the consumer, but not what it was sold for to the distributor. So as prices went up, they couldn't sell it for enough to cover their costs, and therefore they would have to start shutting power off, and that's reducing power. And that's pretty frustrating when you can't adjust the thermostat in your own home at this point in California, in many places, because the government controls that to try to avoid the the problems with their unwillingness to fully deregulate. And there's problems that come with every policy that's out there, no doubt about it. But the benefit that comes from government having as little involvement as possible, and where they do create regulation to make it consistent and make sure it's applied consistently to all, and then we'd have a much better system in the long run. But short term, a lot of the policies that you see these other entities, states and so forth come up with, they seem to show a benefit in the short term, and so therefore they think, oh, we've had a win, this is a better way to do things. And it's just part of that ongoing cycle of extremes. The pendulum and the polarization swung so far with Barack Obama, it's going to swing back the other way. It's when Reagan took office, he came in, and I've told you this before, Reagan's policies, nobody liked him at the time. Everybody predicted he was going to be hated by everybody. And then he's still one of the most beloved presidents in American history that has support that crossed political party boundaries. And what most people hear about is just the negative. They don't get the rest of it until days like Ronald Reagan's funeral, as an example. There was, or the day he left office. There was a guy, in fact, they interviewed the same guy when Ronald Reagan finally passed, who had written one of the most scathing articles about Ronald Reagan on the eve of his last days in the Oval Office, or as he had left. I think it was published the next day, as he'd left office, and saying that history would look back on this man with great disdain, and they would see all of his flaws and all the bad things that he did, and then many years later at his funeral, that reporter, to his own credit, ate his words, said, well, I guess he's not going to be falling into the category of description that I gave him, in short. And so he said, I still despise the president's policies, which was funny. I mean, he's still sour graping it. But he said, there's no doubt he is going to go down as one of the most popular presidents in American history. And he has. Why? Because, man, he did things that even his own cabinet became nervous about because it hadn't produced any great revenues. The tax cuts were broad across the board and sustained. And after about 2.5, 3 years, he had his own cabinet saying, Mr. President, we got to raise taxes. This was back in the day when you still had people concerned about only spending what you take in, which is something that we just don't get anymore. The concept of there's only a limited amount of resources to go around. And I think even if you talk to those people who may see government benefits cut back or curtailed or limited, and you told them, okay, here's what's going to happen. We can keep going with your program here, but then we got to keep going with the post office and everybody else wants to keep doing the same thing. We're going to have to cut back some stuff. We're not going to cut yours, though. And what are we going to be left with? Favorite pet department of cash crop that the Democrats have is our military, United States military. So you get rid of or you significantly hinder our military, and now you have an inability for you to have a place to live to begin with. So all those other government benefits and housing and all the other things that you have, and you look at the what you might not have after that, whatever they curtail or cut back on, and you can't live with that when it affects you, so just take it from the military. Well, what are you going to do when the drug cartels are running rampant all over the place? And there's some people who don't care, but most voters do care about whether or not their daughter or son is enticed or encouraged or forced even to get involved in drug trafficking. Because that's what a lot of the immigrants are having to do that are coming in now. They're being forced to traffic drugs. That becomes your transportation train. And it's not a pretty picture, especially for those people who are involved, because there's rival gangs and there's law enforcement, and they tend to shoot these individuals and ask questions later because of how violent they are in enforcing the law. And you have the Zeta as an example. This is the militant arm of the drug cartels. The Zeta are conditioned to be completely unconcerned about what consequences come to their way if they murder a sheriff, as an example. I mean, they killed more politicians in Mexico than you could possibly imagine. And has it made things better? Not really. Because most people over there, like I said, are like most people here, they're reactionary, not proactive, and they don't want to get in trouble, they don't want to get involved because something might happen to them. And in the meantime, all the rest of us are paying the price. All the rest of us are paying the price. I was going to show you a few things today because I meant to. One, just because it's absurd. Told you. I had this presented to me by a New York rabbi. It's called a shofar. And this is what was blown around the city walls of Jericho in the Bible 7 times before it came crashing down. This is what is oftentimes blown on high holy days. And I had somebody break a chip out of the mouthpiece. When I was doing Facebook Live, I tried to illustrate how it would sound and compensate for that chip. Couldn't do that. I think, and I've minimized it enough now, I can make it work. So I should start every show off like this, but driving with this shofar, even though it sounds like chauffeur, it's a shofar, and making the shofar sound would not necessarily be that easy. Please, by the way, subscribe to this broadcast if you haven't already, and share it. I very much appreciate that. We had quite the degree of popularity and following when Facebook was allowing Facebook Live to be run like they start you off. And then, of course, when you get to a certain level of popularity, they will reduce your audience or reduce the notices that your audiences get so that you can't get that way without boosting it. And it's very disappointing to me because all of the original aspects that I believed you could utilize to become an influencer in Facebook as a social media platform have given way to their new algorithms, which they claim they have no power over and changing, which I don't believe at all. I mean, I think that there's some difficulties in the fact that it's a busy, concentrated world on Facebook these days. And 5-6 years ago, it wasn't as busy. But now what they're doing is clearly designed as a pressure tactic to get you to spend some money. But anyway, here's how this sounds. I'm going to stop while I'm ahead. It was awesome. So the shofar has been blown. The neighbors in the office building here are probably wondering, what the heck is that guy doing? He's blowing a shofar. I can hear him talking across the way through the wall, so I know they heard that. And they're wondering, what is that? They've been afraid to come over here since I started all this. They have like some sort of internet tech business, and they've been trying to get Scott and Stacy with Cactus Law to sign up with them, and we already got a contract with someone else. And but so they have not been coming over since I've been showing up with all the knives, axes, and everything else. I mean, So I Married an Axe Murderer is a movie, not part of what I do. Sharpening a knife. It appears many people don't know how to do this. I don't care whether you're a housewife, a domestic engineer, a professional woman, professional guy, domestic dude, whatever they may call you. There's going to come a time where you need to cut the Christmas turkey. You need to slice a ham. You're going to have kitchen knives, which, by the way, I'm going to offer, I'll have them posted soon, some far superior American design knives made in our great partnership with Wazirabad Damascus Steel. They look great and they hold an edge, and you don't have to sharpen them as often, but you still need to know how to sharpen a knife appropriately. And so, ArmoryOutfittersUSA.com. But this is one of those things that people were usually much better at when we took some time to do it. Now everybody doesn't have the time. I've practiced since the time I was a kid, so I've gotten what I would say probably better than most at keeping a consistent angle on the blade as you should try to shave off a thin slice. That's the action that you should try. And with modern steels, like if you're buying your knives at the bulk set that you get from Target or Walmart, every now and then they may have a fairly decent set, but in most cases that steel is really soft and it gets dull really quick and it's very cheap. And the handles will break off if you're using them too heavy, and they're just not handy stuff. Or they're super serrated, which are never supposed to need to be sharpened. But I can tell you, I've had Cutco knives before. And for a good long while, they work pretty good. I mean, there's a serrated. But they're going to serrate, which is ripping and tearing of things in some instances, and not giving you always that pretty slice. And when they do need sharpening, Cutco will sharpen them for you. But you've got to get it to Cutco, which means you're going to have to be without a knife. A little practice, maybe not on the prettiest first knife that you get from ArmoryOutfittersUSA.com, but some knife somewhere you're going to have to start with. Buck knives, if you get an original good buck knife sold by a buck dealer, it's going to be hard to sharpen those knives because they are very hard. And the difficulty is in keeping a consistent angle. Now, I will tell you that to go forward on one side this way and then underneath this way is the preferred method. I learned it differently. You can apply it that way if you haven't been doing it differently for years. It shouldn't be too hard for you to develop the coordination for it. But you're going to see me do it differently because it was just the way I needed to do it to get a consistent angle. But consistency is the big part of it. So you're going to take the knife at about a 45-degree angle. I take a little less, but whatever it is, it needs to be the same. You don't have to know what angle it is. Nobody's going to come by and measure you, but it needs to be consistent. And so when you first start off, if it's really dull, you can have more pressure. As it gets sharper, you're going to have a little less pressure. But I'm going to do this like 20 times on each side. I didn't count to begin with. It's not that critical, but I can pretty much gauge when I get close to 20. And I'm constantly trying to keep all the way to the point, an even edge, and gently. This is already pretty sharp. The tip could use a little bit more, the front part of it. So once I get done with it, doing it in one direction, you would want to go the other in this way. I hold it like this, and I've got a guard on this, and this is a big full-size, medium coarse diamond rod. And we'll offer some of these to you as well. but you can get these diamond rods just about anywhere. You need the harder diamond rod steel in order to, let me see if I can get it like this, in order to take off enough steel with each time that you are sharpening or making a stroke. Otherwise, even with the best consistency in hand position, you're never going to be able to keep it consistent enough to take off enough steel to get that razor sharp edge. And then you can go down from here if you need to a fine edge and give yourself a little bit more of a smooth and razor sharp edge from there. I have 2 sticks. I usually just take this one because I can do a pretty good job with this one stick and getting a razor sharp edge. And if you can look and see the sharpening edge, it's that shiny edge, it's consistent from the tip all the way through. If you've got where you start to see your sharpened edge, that bright shiny part of the metal, where it's uneven, that means that you're not keeping a consistent position in your hand as you sharpen the knife. The other thing, sharpening a knife, never run your finger long ways. It makes me cringe to think about it. I learned that very early on, and all you gotta do is cut yourself one time, and you will if you do that, and I see people continue to do that. The thing you want to do, I like to utilize the whole width of the finger or a knuckle, and if it's dry, I know you probably can't hear the very dry, but if it's dry and catchy, very sticky when you do that, that's a good sign that it's pretty sharp, and you'll get a good chance to feel. The other thing that you can do is roll your fingers off the edge like so. And I'll do this every now and then just to ensure that I haven't rolled my edge from sharpening too much on one side, or that I'm not feeling any kind of drag across here, which would mean that I've maybe sharpened it a bit too thin. Best thing to do for that is use the knife, and you'll probably notice that after you've dulled a knife and sharpened it a couple of times is when you'll get the best edge on it, because you'll wear down any inconsistencies or maybe you'll make it consistent to your angle of sharpness, and that's when you'll get a blade that's really sharp. So again, you're taking a very thin slice off the edge of it like so. It's almost like you're trying to shave a thin layer off of your sharpening tool, and then you're going to go and you're going to do the same thing and try to have that same angle the other way. Like I said, this is the technique I do. They say never to draw the blade back toward yourself, but I couldn't get a consistent edge on it, and when I started doing it this way, I was able to get it really sharp. Most people can go the other route, but this really fast thing you see people do, like maybe you've seen on some of the chef shows, that if you're using an inferior knife, which some of your big chefs should not be, or it's not yours and you don't care, I guess you can go at it that way. But the sloppy nature of that ends up, you start to hit the side plates of your blade, and you're making all sorts of nicks and scratches in it. And if you've got a highly polished blade, now you're really messing it up, and it's unnecessary. So I like to take a more careful approach to it and making sure that you get that. The other thing that you can do is that on your nail, you very delicately want to do this. If you just slightly put the blade at about a 45-degree angle, see it wants to slide off. It's got a little bit of a dull spot there. If it slides across evenly off your nail, ladies are never going to do this with their painted nails, so this is probably a guy technique, then it could be a little sharper. If it sticks, that means it's sharp enough that your hardened nail is actually at a very tiny level, and you do this oh so lightly, is actually cutting into that nail just slightly, and that's how it's catching. And you know that's usually a sign that your blade is very sharp. So once you get it to that, and some blades, you know, depending on what the job is, you may not want to have a razor sharp edge on it. If you have you know, different like blades designed for different things, having a really thin edge may not be what you want. Like on an axe, we could go to the extreme there. If you're going to split wood with an axe, you may not want that razor sharp edge or one that shaves hair, but you want it sharp. And so if you get it too sharp, you get that edge too thin, and if you hit a really hard knot in some mesquite wood as an example, then you can roll that edge over, and it's not that that can't be fixed, but it becomes then much duller than it would have been otherwise. So It depends on what the purpose is. If you're cutting meat or small limbs and trees, then that's probably okay. This is very thick and heavy with zero bad Damascus steel. So, you know, this getting to the point which it's already at is probably sufficient. And like I said, once you use the blade and you dull it and then sharpen it again, you don't want it to get too dull, because that's the other thing. If you use this until it's dull as a butter knife, you will be working on sharpening it forever. And usually after I get done with, if I'm hunting or whatever and I'm skinned out, you know, in between an animal, I'll usually go back and resharpen it. But hare and hogs can dull, feral hogs in particular, can dull a blade faster than anything. The only thing that dulls it faster than that is cardboard. If you're cutting a lot of cardboard with your blade, you can almost be guaranteed that you're going to have to sharpen it more often. But it's what a knife is for. So if you got to cut cardboard boxes and break them down, you know, do it, and then make it a point to sharpen it afterward. Because if you let it get really, really dull, hard steel, you're going to have to work and work at it to get an edge back on there. Whereas if you just touched it up a few times and, you know, then before you put it away, you're good to go. And Damascus steel, again, I say this, you always need to keep a thin coat of oil or some sort of anti-rust material on here. One thing that I did on my Bowie knife, which has worked out incredibly well, and I had great success with it on my firearm, was frog lube. And I'm pretty sure you can find frog lube if you search for it. If not, I mean, there's a number of other stores that have it. But frog lube has been shown to keep corrosion and pitting and other such things from occurring on steel and firearms. And apparently it's an all green product, meaning like there's no toxin to it. It's not poisonous. It doesn't have all that horrible smell. It smells slightly minty, which is pleasant and nice. And it's far superior to a lot of that very strong smell of anti-rust, you know, treatment that you use on things. Plus, I mean, once I've done my, I did my first AR was a Daniel Defense with that frog lube. You have to degrease everything first. Read the instructions, because the kits that come with it, it looks like water you're spraying on stuff. But that's the cleaner and degreaser, and it really does get all the oil or anything else that you WD-40, you know, grease, anything else on there. You got to get it all off. Then heat the metal up. I usually use a hair dryer. You're not gonna with a hair dryer heat a steel up to a point in which you're going to destroy the temper, because the heating and cooling series of actions is part of a formula that each knife maker has highly protected, because it makes the steel and the materials in the steel that they're using perform in a particular way. And with Damascus, it makes it very hard to hold a great edge, but you have two different steels blended together in a crucible steel, is what they call it, and different patterns you can make by different skill sets and techniques. But you have flexibility so it doesn't break, and then you also have incredibly hard edge holding ability that is fantastic. So with all of this, I put the frog lube on it, heated it up, follow the instructions. Once you put it on, it's almost like butter, soft butter, room temperature butter, and it melts and flows like butter on hot steel. And what it does is it bonds with the metal at a molecular level. It gives it a lubricant, which should make it, when we start doing some tests here very soon, we're going to cut watermelons or whatever else it is, rope, a few other things. I'm going to take this to the full test of what you've seen some other knife manufacturers do to woo you with the performance of their steel. We're going to show you what the original designer steel, that is the oldest designer steel, what it can do with the combination of masters in the craft, and at the same time in modern CNC machining and the rest of it, to give you the best of both worlds. But all of our knives, don't be mistaken, there are tons of other Damascus steel makers that are not doing the quality construction that we are. This is full tang, meaning that this blade goes all the way through to the handle, and they leave one point here just so you can see. You could cover that up, but a lot of your inferior knife makers will either have a very short piece here, which is not nearly as strong, because it doesn't give you the full width and strength of the handle, or they will cut here at the guard and weld underneath this where you can't see an inferior or cheaper piece of Damascus steel. Damascus steel comes at a premium because it takes skill and time and labor to make. And it's highly sought after because of its beautiful look and because of the history that's involved with it. And of course, now you take that with a tempering process that gives you even greater personality to it, and you're talking about a blade that is quality through and through. Plus, I mean, if you look at the skill set on the tooling, now this is for aesthetics, but it certainly does make for quite the attractive looking blade. Plus, they even have it here on the hand guard of the hilt, and even on the pommel. So you can see that they've, I mean, everywhere that you can imagine, including the fit and finish of the different bone handles. You have some brass spacers there between the camel bone handle and the water buffalo horn. But I mean, that is a perfect fit and finish all the way through, and a handle design that fits good in the hand and is something that you could utilize for a wide variety of different things. This is actually probably a more practical size blade for a wider range of things than my favorite, but I picked this because you know, I could feel the cutting and slashing ability that we could demonstrate because of its weight and balance, and this just fit my hand incredibly well. Plus, it's got a guard to keep me from sliding up on the blade and one from it slipping out of my hand. So all the way around, I couldn't say no to this. This is, but again, that's why we make a wide variety of them. I'm going to have a second one as well. And although this, and by the way, you can find this on the website at ArmoryOutfittersUSA.com. But, you know, we have some smaller versions coming in as well. The one that I may have to get at some point in time, the hardest steel that our manufacturers have been impressed with in their process of knife construction is D2 steel. This is one of those in D2 steel. And there'll be some other designs that we make in this D2 steel as well. It is the hardest of steels to begin with. And then, of course, making it into this almost, it looks like Excalibur. Probably should have called it Excalibur, but I know there's going to be a sword that I'm going to design that I'll have to name that, so I didn't want to use it up. But we call this one Quicksilver, and this it's deceptive because you can use a lot of inferior steels and or less superior and polish them out much more easily to make that finish. This, being such hard steel, is a challenge. And if you only knew what it would take to get the blade polished to this level, that alone is something miraculous. But the other part of it is how well balanced and how light this is in a full tank construction. And the D2 steel, we'll demonstrate to you soon, is so hard and so durable. Usually most people will not use it in a blade of this size because they don't know how to create the performance in the metal that will not make it so brittle. This is both rugged and durable for its size. Most of your D2 steel blades will be much shorter. But also, it's got a hollow ground blade to it, so you can put a razor's edge on it. I've got this to where it's just about perfect. Maybe a little bit more. I need to put a little bit more edge on the tip, but that feels pretty good. And the nice thing about this, I mean, if you had to have one knife that you were going to depend upon, and you know, wanted to have to sharpen it as little as possible, it would have to be something like this D2 high-speed tool steel. What do they use D2 steel for? Because all the designer steels they make knives out of usually came up with another purpose besides just having a knife blade made out of it, these days anyway. There's a lot of older ones that steel was designed because knife blades were respected, and that's what a majority of steel went to, and outside of, you know, industrial construction. This steel is what is used to cut the tools from other steel that cuts hard steel. So this is like if you were, you know, this is the diamond that cuts the diamonds. That's, you know, in jewelry when they're doing that, the only thing hard enough to cut a diamond is another diamond. And so that is kind of the process. Well, this is the steel that cuts all others. So, I mean, theoretically, if you know, if two knives went to war, this would be the one that would win. And unless, I guess, it was against another D2 steel knife, and then I don't know what would happen at that point in time. But this is just so convenient. First of all, it's got a great feeling handle with that hardwood. That is, I think, a Turkish walnut, I want to say, but I may be mistaken on that. I looked that up for you. But you've got two different types of hardwood, brass spacers, and like I said, different handle materials like this. It's aesthetically appealing. It's pretty, but it has another point and a benefit, and that is that no matter what the temperature is, all of these materials expand and contract in different rates at different temperatures. So as a grip goes, your brass spacers in there and your fiber spacers are going to, well, your brass will expand and contract. Your fiber spacers really won't much, and your hardwoods will, and it creates a little bit of grip to every design. So not only is it aesthetically pleasing, and it looks so beautifully fit and finished that you don't see it, but you can feel the grip in your hand as it just tends to want to marry your palm. And so this is probably the most expensive blade that we have, and if you were to buy this manufactured anywhere else for a full tank construction of D2 steel with a special recipe of construction and tempering with the hollow ground blade of this length and size, you'd be looking at a very expensive price, because D2 steel is it's expensive. This is $450 and a steel at that. But I mean, you're talking about a perfect fit and finish knife, one that I mean, heck, you could. This is what the hero of a movie might have with them if they were to make another such movie, like Rambo. Probably Rambo may be the last movie I can think of where you had a hero who was known for his knife. Typically now, if you think about this, your antagonist or your bad guy, they're the ones that almost always have knives. Still, good guys will carry guns. Ironically, Hollywood has made an awful lot of money off of guys with guns stopping bad guys. But you know, when it comes to regular society, they don't seem to want to take the same kind of consideration and live in the same, at least, principles. Now everybody with a knife is a bad guy, and most guys with guns are bad guys. And if they can make a superhero that doesn't use a gun, then they will. Although Captain America, sadly, never depicted, except rarely with, for I think maybe one scene in the first movie, with bearing his name, was he shown using a .45. But in the early days of Captain America, because it was World War II, he carried in 1911 Colt .45, and of course now he does not. But you know, this sort of looks like vibranium. It's one of those fantastic supernatural steels of superheroes that there's no such thing. They're all capable of being destroyed if you're going to work at it hard enough. But this one would take more work than most, if not all. And so, but the Quicksilver, fantastic stuff. So now you know how to sharpen a knife, basically, and it takes a little bit of a practice. You want to make sure that your hand is always in a safe and consistent place when you're going one direction. And like that, you're trying to shave off a very thin edge of the sharpening rod and do it consistently. I would say you start with 20 strokes on each side. And depending on how dull it is, if it's not really dull, you don't have to press really hard, because the diamond rod is diamond, and that's still a bit harder. And then you go the other direction, but keep a consistent and even stroke on it. You may not always need to sharpen every part of the blade, so you may section it off. And with me, I'm doing the front part of it because that is where I have the least of that razor edge. Here in the belly, as it's designed to cut better, it seems that it gives you that edge, pardon the pun, in sharpening too. So something to think about. Why does this belly part, this back end here, get sharp so much faster than the rest of it? Well, that's the part where when you get to that part of the blade, because of the design, it aids and assists you in its cutting. So on the draw towards you, if you're cutting through whatever, a limb, a big roast, a ham, or whatever it will be, that it's when you hit here that you're going to have the greatest leverage advantage because of that It's almost like a watered down version of an Archimedeal curve. And if you ever had the protractor in school, you know that curve that went with that swirl, that was developed in ancient times by a brilliant mathematician who was a millennia or 2 millennia ahead of his time, Archimedes. He invented the auger, basically, the same screw that uses to dig fence post holes, and you know, you rent those augers in most cases. Maybe you own one, but most people rent them. That Archimedes developed that mathematical formula for the slope and the twist and the turn of that, as well as it was the Archimedeal screw. And Archimedes also came up with the curve, which is a mathematical formula that we find as a fluid but symmetrical part of nature without corners. And that's basically what the edge of this blade is utilizing in its shape. And here is where you have the greatest advantage, because you're coming into a belly, or in some cases, you know, you're maybe slicing or chopping into it. But drawing, or either way, this design is a highly efficient blade edge design, and it does a lot of the work for you, or it magnifies the effort that you put into things when you're trying to slice through it or chop through it. And so, with a belly point though too, it gives you the advantage in design if you need to skin or do other such stuff. So truly, when they talk about survival knives, most Americans are thinking about the type that have some sort of Rambo-like unscrewed cap and the handle has got stuff in it. Those knives look really cool, but in most cases they're very weak in design because you don't have the full tang, and you're having to mount a blade by threads, usually on 2 thin points, and then maybe welded, but still you don't have the strength that you do in a full tang design. And a knife in a survival situation is designed to be able to be used to cut and chop and do everything you could possibly do and need to have done in one tool. It's not designed to be a storage unit where you're going to put matches and other such stuff in the handle, and if you haven't prepared enough to have other places to carry stuff, you're not going to probably survive because you haven't thought well enough ahead. But you want a knife that's not going to break. If you need to, even for hunting, you could take lace or leather strap or strips or vine and fashion it to the end of a stick and have yourself a makeshift spear, or a pole arm if necessary to defend yourself. And you want to make sure that even with all that additional leverage on your advantage, that this does not break. That would be the tragedy of the situation. And so when I say survival knife, I'm not thinking of something from Rambo necessarily. The blade would be fine, but it is the construction of its durability. If your blade breaks off from your handle, now you are going to have to find a way to make another handle for this broken blade, and that takes time, and that's time that you could be gathering food, making shelter, doing other such stuff. So everybody needs a good knife, and they probably don't realize that until they're in a situation in which they don't have one. And then you discover the need for it. I think it's a morbid movie. I have only watched a portion of it. I don't think I can watch the whole thing. As much as I am not queasy at all, I don't enjoy watching movies that too accurately depict the suffering and misery of torture in particular. I call it torture porn. I've not been a fan of those horror films. I'm much more of a fan of the suspense and the psychological type terror where, you know, you're always on the edge of your seat, and you know, the horrific things that you didn't expect to happen are happening, and you know, that sort of thing. But there was a movie, it wasn't a horror movie, starred the guy, I'm trying to think of his name now. I think he played Spider-Man in one of the Spider-Man. No, he looked like the guy. He played Gremlin's son. I'm trying to think of the guy's name, Mini Gremlin, Gremlin Jr. in one of the Spider-Men. But he portrayed a true story. This actually happened, where there was a guy who went hiking by himself, mountain climbing by himself, and he fell into a crevasse of sorts, I guess a hole, in which a boulder then rolled onto his arm and pinned him in place. And he couldn't get free, and he couldn't get free for such a lengthened period of time that now, after, I don't know, the movie's called 72 Hours or something along those lines. 132 hours, or it's called too hell of a long time for sure, to have your arm pinned under a boulder. And he was dehydrating, he didn't have food, and he didn't have a knife. All he had was a Leatherman tool, which has not the greatest steel in the world at all, and I'm being kind when I say that, and a single blade. It's great for all the other multiple purpose tools that it has on it, but you know, out in the mountains or rocks or the desert, the forest, you're probably not going to find a lot of things that have Phillips head screws or flathead screws or other such things on them, in which that tool is going to become incredibly valuable. Now, if you have gear and equipment with you that needs it, then it's definitely always something to think about taking with you. But he had to use the very dulled blade that he already made even duller by trying to chip away or break away part of the boulder rock in order to free his arm. And instead he had to take that dull, short blade that is almost like an afterthought on a Leatherman or multi-purpose tool and cut through his arm and the tendons, and then finally have to break the bone without passing out to free himself. Now, I mean, that's like a one-trick thing. This guy has got guts, temerity, everything you could possibly ever want to survive just about any situation. This guy's got what it takes to be a hero in combat and battle. There's no doubt. But once you've done that, now you're never going to be the capable hero that you once were, because you've crudely hacked off your arm and now you are one appendage down. And that's not a good thing to do. You need, you know, all your appendages unless you truly do have supernatural powers, which he doesn't. But he had extraordinary self-discipline. He did pass out, he said, a couple of times. I would have passed out a couple of times too. I mean, I pushed myself to the point in which I experienced pain, and to the extent in which you had to take a little sleepy nap break. Okay. But I would never have to want to have sacrificed an arm. And by the time he got, I mean, I'm not saying with a better knife he might have been able to salvage his arm, but it was very shortly thereafter that he freed himself with a, you know, he tourniqueted his arm off, that he was able to walk, and there were people search and rescue just started looking for him. I guess there was people walking along anyway that were not far off. Now maybe they would have been able to hear him yell, but he had already yelled for help for so long that he'd lost his voice. For the most part, he couldn't make a loud noise. And he'd spent an exhaustive amount of time with an inferior tool amputating his arm and then having to break the bone with that non-lockback crappy metal 1-inch blade that comes on a lot of those Leatherman tools. Love a Leatherman, don't get me wrong. But if he'd had a true knife, even in this horrific scenario that nobody should ever have to go through, he would have been able to get out of that much quicker. And maybe with longer blade and greater leverage, especially something as hard as a D2 steel, he might have been more successful at breaking away pieces of that boulder to actually free his arm and not have to go to the extent of having to sever it. That's the last thing. I think, you know, most likely, this is my thought, I don't know, but I've never been in that desperate of a situation. I might have died and just let it go because I didn't want to have to cut my arm off. I would have imagined that I might bleed to death, and you know, I knew that I was a ways away from civilization as it was, and so I probably didn't think I would have been able to survive it and wouldn't have tried to cut my arm off, and either would have been found dead of dehydration and exposure because it was freezing cold at night and then hot as heck during the day, and you're exhausted and weak from no food and no water. Like I said, I saw enough of the movie. I got the idea, and I just don't like the concept of watching that much self-punishment in order to survive. That, to me, I got it. Reading about it, I didn't need to see a guy screaming in the most realistic pain as he cut his arm to the point in which he then had to break the bone and splinter it, and it's just a hack job. That's got to be the worst pain. And no thanks. I don't even want to have to think about that situation. As I had a drill sergeant tell me one time, you don't have to practice being miserable. It'll come naturally. And, you know, I guess you got to think about some of this stuff, though. What if it happens to you? If it happens to me, I have at least read enough about Civil War amputations. I probably could do the same job, and I would love to think that I would not have to do it with such a crude and insufficient blade as that little thing that comes on a Leatherman, like that guy did. That was just horrific. But even if it's not the D2 steel knife, lots of other things that, again, we need to stop the stigma about knives being something that we treat like bombs or explosives, and we're going to deny legal, lawful businesses an opportunity, like my own, to market and advertise on some of our favorite places like Facebook, which are really doing an inconsistent and selective job of identifying people whom they have political disagreement with and trying to stifle them and exclude them from the connections, networks, and associations that I have built, as many as other people have as well, over the years. I didn't just show up on Facebook, and they would rather not have us, they think, or our money, and advance an agenda to have the world mirror their thoughts about what we should have, and somehow they think they're making the world safer if they don't have any people selling quality cutlery, knives, blades, the rest of it. It's ridiculous. It's another one of those that I like a lot. I hesitate to even show this one because I kind of think this may be one I have to have myself. I don't know. This is the fine Wazirabad Damascus as well, that gives you all the great personalities of the original designer steel. It will cut, it will hold an edge, it's flexible, it's got a great point. This is a clip point design, which in contrast to the one I just showed you, instead of it continuing straight and then having a belly, this drops down. So it gives you more of a centered point down through the middle of the blade, and that has its advantages in certain areas. If you're cutting open sacks, you need to poke a hole in it. It makes it a bit easier, but these are degrees of difference. Even a straight back knife will do an excellent job if it's sharp enough, but this helps to poke a bit better, and so puncturing is a bit of an advantage with this, but also the forward only hilt allows you to choke up on the blade so that you can create the effect of it being a shorter blade for smaller work. And that helps because if you always had to hold a knife here, you lose a little bit of coordination. It's, again, not the end of the world. You can make it work no matter what. But this would be another one of those. It resembles kind of a military issue profile of a blade. So a multitude of different uses, and you can see the quality work all the way through there. You're not going to find that anywhere else, with complete, high quality, and tempered Damascus. Full tang, meaning that where this notch is here in the blade, it notches down again, but it has a solid one piece that goes all the way through and to the hilt. The pommel. And many others will try to appear to give you that same design when really they have done everything from leave nothing but a small peg of steel here, or cut the blade off right below where the hilt would be and weld a cheaper piece of Damascus underneath. All those tactics save money in production, but we and my partner do not do that. These come with the highest quality construction for the most rugged durability that you can imagine. And we'll start doing some tests with these, which will be fun. I mean, this segment will cover everything you can imagine, from politics to how-to. Just showed you how to polish and finish up an edge, if not do more work and create a sharpened edge on a knife. And if you have questions, you can certainly ask. Subscribe to this, share this with your friends, please, and we'll talk more about current events and some other things as well. I try to do a little bit every day, so we'll talk about some of the more current things and then some visual things, and certainly I'll talk about my businesses. I have a few of them. A social media spit it out in a second. A social media marketing company, as well as a Armory Outfitters USA, which deals in all things Damascus and other steel, from cutlery, swords, axes that are meant for use, onto armor, which I can't wait to show you some of the examples of that. Authentic reproduction that's accurate down to the detail. So if you're in the movie production or movie business, certainly that'll be one of those that I would love to help outfit. Everything from Vikings to European armor, swords of every country and make you can imagine and design. We do custom order things as well, and you can have your business logo etched in the handle, on the leather sheath. All of our blades come with quality leather sheaths. We'll also have some leather jackets, garments, and other things that are designed by yours truly, and a combination of that and our manufacturer. Some of the designs are just some modifications that I've made on the things that that they already make. But I believe you'll like those, and our leather jackets will be incredibly affordable. My manufacturing partner is in the leather capital of Pakistan, and most of what people think in the quality of Pakistan comes from all of the imitators and knockoffs from the premier manufacturer of quality in Indonesia, in my opinion. And I believe they can also outdo in cost and also in quality for what many people are sending their contracts for manufacturing to China or Taiwan or Japan. We can do that, and in high volume, whatever your need may be. So if you have something you'd like to have manufactured, whatever it is, with your brand or as a part of whatever service and products that you have, we can certainly do that and customize it however you'd like. So anyway, if you need to get a hold of me, please message me, but definitely subscribe to this because it's already 9 o'clock. It's time for me to get to busy and do some of the other work I've got to do. And check out the website, share it with your friends if you will, please. Help be part of the, call it the Von Wade Brigade, because we refuse to allow unfairness, injustice, inconsistency, bullying, all those sorts of things that people in power oftentimes make the mistake of doing when they put something as self-centered as their personal opinions as the standard by which everyone else must abide, and as inconsistent as that is, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense. But the people I know, the people that have always been attracted to what I do, have always been the type of people that aren't going to let that sort of thing stop them. They're just not. And it becomes an issue that is bigger than any individual one of us, but we believe in standing up for the little guy and rooting for the underdog. It's part of, if you're from America, it's what we identify as one of our greatest values. It's that underdog. It's the one that's right but may not have a whole bunch of support, or that's being done wrong. You always got somebody that wants to use their power to establish the fact that they can be wrong and have their way. We don't like that. So help out one of the good guys. I appreciate it. I'll help you guys too. And as things come along, I will offer you guys some special deals, and hopefully we'll grow the viewership and the things that we do. This is only day 2. I plan on it taking a little while to rebuild the momentum we had, but I'm hoping that you'll be here regularly with me, 6 to 9 in the mornings, and then this will go up so you can watch it later again and share it from here. I appreciate all that you guys do. Make good choices and have a happy life. And I believe yesterday I lost power, so I did not end it like I wanted to, and I don't see a clear finish button on this, but I'm sure that there is one. So I will find out a way. Maybe it's the 3 buttons, and it says share. I could have shared it a long time ago apparently, and I should have done that. But I'll tweet it and I'll Facebook it. And then hopefully you guys will do the same thing. I didn't do that today. Dang it. So people watching this, it very well could work out that I learned to do this on a more regular basis. So you're hanging with me in the last few seconds. Of course, you can find all the ways to contact me, I'm sure, right here on my YouTube channel. You can send me a message if you'd like. And you can follow me on Facebook. It's Eric Von Wade. There's a public figure page. I have a personal page, but that's capped out, so I'm trying to get that going. And Armory Outfitters USA. We have an Instagram, we have a Facebook, and we have a Twitter. So please follow me on all of those. I would very much appreciate it. And we're also Eric Von Wade on Pinterest. I got a Pinterest too. I mean, just when you think that you've covered all the bases, then you find out that there's some more stuff that you got to do. But that, you got sunglasses that'll slide down your face or things. These don't do any of that. These are awesome. And kind of like it. Every time I put them on, I feel like, I immediately got a little bit better looking. They've got them in different colors. There's a gold frame pair. Those were pretty hard not to take home with me because I thought the gold looked good. But the black, you know, they go with such a wide variety of things. I could always go back and get the others. And by the way, Valentine's Day is coming up. So one of the next shows we're going to talk about, great Valentine's Day gift ideas for those of you. Something like that secret is tough because women love that whole romantic aspect of the guy on his own proposing all over again to redo their vows. And I don't know if they're going to, I said, well, you know, since you're my source for photography, if you need a good photographer, I will be more than happy to be that photographer. We could do the whole ceremony all over again. And I don't know, tears of joy, but man, it was just a great thing. And so I was impressed. You know, sometimes it's not always what you spend, but the effort and the romance that you put out. And so they've been married a long time. They've got some great kids, and they decided that he was going to do that all over again. But sunglasses, I'm telling you, shades, they make the whole scenario. These Oakleys, and you can get these at Masters Eyewear Optical. Masters Eyewear Optical right here in Corpus Christi. And you can find them on Facebook as well. They'll soon have some other social media platforms, but I'm helping them out with a bit of that. These are so lightweight, and they are so thin, yet they don't go anywhere. When you put them on, they're there. And then being able to have my no-line bifocals in them soon is going to be awesome. I'm also going to get a pair of, Oakley makes these frames called the Lizard. They're titanium, but they're very, very thin. Almost like you're not wearing, they're almost frameless, but they have a frame across the top. And so I don't have to keep doing this to see at a distance. And then this, when I want to read down here, it'll have a no-line bifocal so I can have the clarity of my good vision at a distance. And at the same time, be able to see. And then if I need sunglasses, I'll have my prescription in here too. They help you with all of that, and plus they've got some of the most awesome designer frames. I don't know where people forgot about this. We have some people who don't need glasses are buying different frames to accent whatever outfit they may be wearing, and they'll just have clear lenses. People who need glasses are oftentimes, they get one pair and then that's it. There's no reason why you can't get more, and especially with the great prices and the things that they offer you there at Masters Eyewear Optical. So they're right next to Roper's on the ground floor, and towards the back side of that building, there's a little office building. It's a brown 2-story. I'll get the address for you shortly, but you can find them if you look up Masters Eyewear Optical, Corpus Christi, Texas, and it's even worth a short drive if you're coming from somewhere else, or even if you want to call them, because these people will stand behind the product. They fit them to your face. They make sure, in fact, she went the extra mile in making sure and trying them both on, giving me her opinion, telling me what she thought, and letting me get a picture of myself if I wanted to. And all of that makes a big difference because they take the time to take care of their customers, and they take care of everybody from infants who are needing specialized glasses to great deals on Costas, on of course Oakleys and Ray-Bans. And all three of those brands, some of my favorite top sunglass makers, have all come up with new designs for this year that are a bit different if you haven't seen them than what Oakleys were known for. I mean, this is a cool Men in Black kind of thing. Will Smith would definitely look pretty cool in these, I think. And so, but it's an updated look, and maybe again for Valentine's Day, you help them go find the frames that they like. Shades can make everything so much cooler. Plus, it's better on your eyes. You actually can get damage over the years to your eyes from being exposed to the sun. So it's not just vanity. It's a practical thing too. And when you get quality sunglasses, they'll last you, and they'll show you how to take care of them. They got it all there together. So get by and see them, Masters Eyewear Optical. And I'm Eric Von Wade, and now we will do the deal in which I will find a way to say goodbye. And I think it's just probably the X button. This is again my second show, so I appreciate your patience and all the other such things. And if I may have missed some messages today, I apologize. I'm learning how to work all this. Soon I'll get in on it. We'll get your comments. And the more you share this and subscribe, you just follow the bottom of this. There's a little red subscribe button. Just click on it and encourage other people to do the same thing. You're helping the good guys, and you're helping me, and I appreciate that. We will help each other. And it's always good to have you. We'll see you tomorrow. And I got some exciting stuff going on then too I'll tell you about. Talk to you soon. Make good choices. Have a happy life.